Oh. Thank you all for being here. This is a small council which we have Saturday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. We have a fantastic group of individuals here, and I'm so excited to be talking to them. But first, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. And consider becoming a YouTube member, hitting us a join button and supporting us that way. Helps us out a ton. All right, so we'll start by introducing our guest. Wick. Oh, God. After all that. Wick is here. Wick is first. Wick, it sounds like the audience has learned a lot more about you than I have. So
It's all about getting to know each other and building relationships. And sometimes the best way to do that is by sharing. And I'm glad to share this time with all of you. Prime, thanks for the invite, and a bunch of lovely panelists today. You have chosen the most attractive of your regulars for tonight, I see. So here we are.
absolutely. All right. People love the frog. Moving on. We have not so erudite. Erudite's here. Yeah, erudite. Erudite is a lot of fun. We don't. I want always to have more of erudite on this channel. She is. I mean, not for her amazing opinions. But for her winning
I was gonna say, but
personality.
I'm the hated face of the enemy.
Yeah. Erudite, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Fine.
It's good. I'm glad
wanna
you're just
say-
doing fine. Do you want to talk about it after? Are you
Yeah,
okay?
let's. I'm only holding on by a thread, pretty
Yeah.
much. But yeah, tell the audience about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Not So Erudite. You can find me under that name on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, technically as well. Yeah, I do politics stuff, but mostly like sociocultural stuff. I like talking about like gender relationships and psychology. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, or if you just want to, hang out with some based motherfuckers, come on by.
Absolutely. All right. Next, we have. I'm not gonna call you that. I'm not gonna.
Why
call
not?
You
It's my new name.
It's not your name.
I
Oh.
rebranded.
Only a problematic person would think to call people.
I'm a
Make people
changed
call them
man.
polite. All right, like you have to prove you're polite. Like you should. It's like being a king, right? You don't like declare you're the king. You simply are the
You
king.
absolutely do. That's how most kings ever became king.
It's
Same
actually
with
God
politeness.
who declared them, but it's
Yeah,
fine.
well, yeah, that's true. But like, yeah, most people they have to experience you, Pan, to come to that conclusion. Problematic. They can just look at you and they're like, okay, I get that.
That's
guy's
what this
gonna be
is for.
trouble, right? So, Pan, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I just got back from an internship in DC, so I am now here with tons of propaganda to spew into your audience's unsuspecting minds, convince them of everything right in the world, and I guess start a cult like Professor Meat. Maybe we'll be rival cults someday. But for now, I'm just here to have some fun.
I am like honestly so happy to see Pan. We have, I guess this is your first close panel back, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Problematic Pan or whatever the fuck his name is. It's one of my best guests, right? Before we went on this internship, you'd see him here all the time. And that's because I just really like talking to him. So I'm really happy that you're here tonight. Thank you. Next, we have Professor Meat. Professor Meat. Like,
What?
You're not a vegetarian, are you? Like that would be the
No,
worst thing.
I'm weighing with it. But I am. It's okay. I'm only a professor of metaphorical meat, so it's not inconsistent. Yeah, we'll have to
metaphorical
explain.
meat.
We'll
Oh, that sounds so
yeah,
delicious.
we'll have to explain meat theory. Yeah, no, it is. It is.
It's
That's what people
related
get
to
on my
Wick's
channel.
metaphorical meat as well.
There's nothing
it is
metaphorical
true.
about my meat.
Why?
Let me clarify. There's nothing
Whoa,
metaphorical.
don't-
about
Prime,
it.
it's a
No,
running
no,
tradition
no.
that I have to make like 2 lascivious comments on all of your problems. I don't know why. I don't know. I've never do this on anyone else's panels.
Don't dismiss the metaphorical narrative like a benefit to Big Dick Wick and his meat. There's a lot of value there. You can learn all about it on my channel and in my cult.
We have a new panel topic tonight, Prime. We're taking over. This is now what we're talking about. Apparently,
Oh,
there's
thank
a lot
God.
to discuss.
Starting now.
I'll just let you know it's a girthy topic. Okay.
I just wanna bleach my ears. Ugh.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Meat theory is good for you. You'll see. You'll see. It'll take time. It'll take time. But yeah,
Oh boy.
yeah. Thanks for having me. I look forward to talking about it.
I regret
And,
everything.
you know, I'll try to see if I'll try to make sure that meat theory doesn't slip in there, but it's hard.
Oh boy. Last but not least, Doobie. See, now Doobie, he's a wholesome gentleman, right? That's what everyone says about Doobie. Wholesome. Doobie, thank you for coming through. Thanks for stopping by. Doobie, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. All right. So, him and his understated intros. Let's give the first topic, or the only topic. It has often been commented on that Americans work more on average than people in other industrialized nations. There has been a search for a work-life balance to avoid burnout. But is the notion of the American work ethic really such a bad thing? If the purpose is to be successful in a highly competitive field, shouldn't people be expected to do more? Okay, shout out to my friend Amanda Smash, who was so kind as to come up with this topic. So thank you. Yeah. So and thank you for the subs. 2 people gave subs, and give another one, and we'll start a hype train. Thanks to us. But yeah. So work-life balance sounds good, makes sense. But if you want to get ahead, it would just seem that you'd have to work harder. Like you'd have to be out there, because if you're not doing it, someone else will. Is that a beneficial attitude to have? And is it so we should simply say that some people are locked out of success if they don't want to kill themselves over it? So we'll start with intros. Go ahead, Wick.
So this is a very interesting topic, and there's a lot of ways we can go about tackling it. First, I will say that work is a tool. There's nothing inherently wrong with work and putting forth effort and doing more than is the bare minimum. I think that that could be a good thing. In fact, if you want to be valued, you have to be valuable in some sense. And in the culture we have today, one of the ways that you can do that is through work and putting forth effort. That said, there is a point where it can become unhealthy, where it can become toxic, where it can become the thing in and of itself. Rather than a tool to achieve the goal, it becomes the goal itself. And in a lot of places in America, it has. And this is, I think, harmful and detrimental. When it comes down to it, for me, the value is on being healthy. I have goals I want to meet, so I do put forth effort. And if I put forth more, I could probably get more reward, but there's a limiting factor here. So there's a lot of nuance here. And my main thing is that, no, it's not necessarily a bad thing, the American work ethic. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Not Saradite.
Yeah, I'm super glad that I get to be on this panel tonight because I really love this topic. Good job, Amanda. Great question. Yeah, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with valuing work ethic. I think there's something wrong in our society where it feels like in many ways we value it above all else. It seems like one of our core doctrines that we kind of attach this somewhat implicit value to. That I think is really destructive. So like work in and of itself is fine. There's nothing wrong with being it's great when you're a good worker. The problem is when we place too much value on that to the detriment of other values that our society should probably try to emphasize as well. And I think we've just got an imbalance in our society. And I'd like to see a course correction of valuing other things instead as well.
Okay. Polite Pan.
Yeah, before I start, I wanted to address some potential misconceptions that people have about how much Americans work. America is only slightly above average when it comes to hours worked. Among OECD countries, the US is ranked 11th. Our workers work an average of about 1,770 hours a year. And that's only 50 hours a year more than the OECD average, which is the equivalent of about, let's say, a week. That means we work less than countries like South Korea, Israel, and Mexico, and are tied with countries like New Zealand and Ireland. Second, the amount of hours we've been working have been decreasing in the US for all but the highest income workers. In 1950, workers worked an average of 2,000 a year, which since then we've had a decrease equivalent to 6 weeks vacation per year. There's only been one group that's not experienced a decrease in the hours worked and has actually experienced an increase. That group is high-income workers. Despite the narrative that you sometimes hear, people who are in the upper middle class or upper work in a profession tend to work significantly more hours than most people. On to whether or not this is a good thing, I'd argue that it's neither a good or bad thing, kind of like how Wick said. There's always been a trade-off between leisure and compensation, and each person needs to find the balance that is appropriate for them. A lot of people will be content with less possessions if it means more leisure time, and others will prefer less leisure if it means more possessions, and both options are completely legitimate. If Frank enjoys wearing Gucci and is willing to work extra to get it, that should be his prerogative. Same with if Jerry spends more time, enjoys more time off and is willing to take a lower salary, that should be his prerogative. There's neither anything good or bad about it. You should just do what works for you.
Okay. All right. Next, Professor Mead.
Yeah, so I think it's important to define what we mean by work ethic when we talk about this in a social context, because there's sort of two conversations that have already been hinted at here, which is like the sort of values that are represented in our society, particularly in America, because that is part of the question, of course, and also like the sort of practical nature, the like more material nature of these problems when it comes to exactly how our like working environment parses out in America. And so I'll just say to the social context, I definitely think that it's been touched on accurately that already that there is a morally neutral nature to like work ethic, right? There's utility to it, which is different from a moral judgment. But I would say that socially speaking, we have a problem in our society where sometimes we conflate like a moral judgment with a practical judgment, a usefulness with morality in our society. And insofar as that's the case, I would say that's a problem. And I do think that's reflected to at least some extent in the way we talked about the practical problems. And while I do think that to some degree there is a alarmist nature to the way that people talk about the problems in our actual working environments, I do think that like we allow these like societal values to get in the way of like either through social context or legislation, like give us better outcomes in our working environments, both like practically and like when it comes to our own well-being as just people.
Okay, thank you. And how about the hype train, guys? Let's talk about that hype train. Almost there to level 2. Doobie, please.
So I'm someone who like I think I can thank my own work ethic that I think I learned from my father for where I am in life right now. I'm doing very well for myself. And I think that there is something to be said about what someone's work ethic says about their character, right? And about who they are as a human being. And I don't think that there's like an over obsession, like a focus. There's too much focus on work ethic, or I think it's a good thing. I think that if your life isn't unbalanced, right, you've got like a bad work-life balance, then it sounds like you need to work harder so you've got more leisure time later in the future. And I think in my experience, most people who say that they are working too hard are working too hard at jobs that aren't worth the work. Right? So they're working stupidly. And yeah, I don't know. I think work ethic is extremely important to me. Right. So when I meet a person, this is one of the things that tells me the most about them. Right. Either like as a potential employee or just like someone who might be my friend. Right. If I see how hard they work at the thing they say they care about. Yeah, it's extremely important. I don't think enough people have a good work ethic, to be honest with you. I think most people say they do, but it's actually like they say they're grinding away, but actually they're doing a bunch of drugs, or they're grinding away, but actually they're playing a lot of video games when they could be working. They're waking up at fucking 10 a.m. When they could be working. And the entire time they're saying, "Oh God, and I'm just working so hard." That's typically my experience of the kind of people that say that kind of shit. The kind of people who say that they're working themselves to the bone.
Okay.
And
yeah. So Doobie, is there a point where in your moral framework here where you would consider someone working too much or too hard? Is there ever an upper limit to this, or is it
when you're working
no such
stupidly?
thing as too hard?
So this is another reason to tell me a lot about somebody as a person, right? So if you're working very hard, you can be working like 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week, 100 hours a week, right? because you have like 2 or 3 jobs, 'cause you're trying to support your family, whatever. But a lot of people are doing that and they don't have 2 or 3 jobs, right? They got one job that they're like a side hustle or something that they're trying to make work, and it's shit. But they're throwing themselves at it over and over and over again and getting nowhere because it's shit, and they're throwing themselves into shit, right? Just repeatedly. If they do have like 2 or 3 jobs, and these are like minimum wage jobs or just above minimum wage jobs, and they're putting all their energy into this 100 hours a week, working their fucking ass off, it tells me that they're probably not a very intelligent person. Because even with like 0 skills, you could direct your attention elsewhere and get much better return on that time investment. So
Yeah,
I don't know. It's like it would say that I would say it's too much when you're doing it stupidly, and a lot of people do it stupidly.
Yeah, so I'd like this is part of sort of my issue is that like I think there's some truth to what you're saying, but I also feel like that conflation I can see that conflation I was talking about in here, because I think a better way to talk about these things is to separate what exactly is the harm there when it comes to like those harms that you're talking about, because the violation that you're thinking of, it seems to me, when you're describing like to someone who is like, oh my god, why am I not getting what I want while they're not working, it isn't so much that a lack of work ethic in that situation is what's bad. What is bad is the hypocrisy of demanding something while not actually be willing to like do anything to get it, right? There's like a lack of fairness there. And now that can parse out subjectively in our society, but like that's the violation that the actor that you're talking about in that situation is committing. But this is exactly my problem, is because there is room in our society, right, for there to be someone who doesn't work hard, who doesn't like contribute GDP, who doesn't ask for something that is disproportionate with what they're willing to put in. And that seems to me to be where maybe where our society
to me people like that seem
individuals.
It seems like a waste of potential, right? So if you're
Why?
if you got uncomfortable with mediocrity and just trudging along doing the same thing every day because it's what you know to do, and you're not really interested in going any further, it's a massive waste of your potential as a human being, right?
I mean, not
I would
necessarily
judge you
makes
for that.
happy. A lot of people, like doing that. Work doesn't have to be the central focus of people's life. If someone wants to work like 35 hours a week at Whole Foods and then spend the rest of the time, doing what they enjoy, I don't see anything inherently wrong about that. And I don't even think that you can say that it's a waste of their time, because, I mean, maybe if they went to college, got a better job and stuff, maybe they'd be less happy. Like, I think it should be up to the individuals know better than society what makes them happy. And people following, doing what they want to do shouldn't be considered a bad thing. I mean, you don't have to hang out.
That didn't make sense if these people also didn't rely on society, rely on people who have a strong work ethic, doing things that are actually like useful to the world. Didn't rely on them to pay their bills, to pay for their Medicare, to pay for their welfare, to pay for all their things, right? And then they don't contribute much to the society through taxes, because they don't pay very many taxes. Right. So if they weren't still taking in some other way, yeah, sure, that might make sense.
But then the problem you have with them isn't their work ethic. The problem you have with them is that they're net leeches on society. It seems like this work ethic thing is kind of tangential to your main gripe, that some people take out more from society than they put in.
Like taxes, the whole concept of taxes is I would say to some extent, like this touristic value of like fair representation, like fair put in and get out, is representing our society, but it's not really the number one reason why we have taxes and stuff like that. Like we have taxes, we have work because like being able to engage in a work, get rewarded for it, being able to tie that to your actual like activity and engagement in the meritocracy to some extent, your ability to like use this and benefit, like function in a society where we have certain normative values, like to some extent all putting into a pot and being able to benefit from it. It's not necessarily, it's predicated upon the utility that it serves to us, not necessarily like every single individual putting something in. I mean, there's some types of welfare that we have for disabled people. We don't necessarily ask children to like commit to child labor.
But to be clear, I'm not speaking about disabled people or people that can't work.
What about like single mothers
who might be like 40 years old working behind the counter?
Well, let me propose a hypothetical,
never
then, right?
Let me anything of themselves.
So let me give you an example then, right, of why this doesn't work. Like, if we're talking about the value of an individual, right? Are we going to say it's bad to be someone who doesn't ask for that much, who lives kind of in like a very by very, very minimal means, who is kind to others, charitable, devotes himself to being very fair, to living life and finding other people to live life and enjoy life with, uplift each other, engage in meaningful friendships, set like valuable normative standards for engaging with other human beings. Like, and if they live a happy and fruitful life and that they share with others, is this person
is
a
the
waste?
person who's
Is this person,
grinding
is that
80,
bad?
90 hours a week? Because I mean, earlier you said 35 hours at Whole Foods. I guess, yeah, there's a work ethic there, but they're not really grinding. I wouldn't call that like
I
grinding.
didn't say they were grinding. I just said
No,
there was
hold on.
like,
So
you know,
if you're when I think work ethic, I'm not just thinking you work a job, right? And that's it. I'm thinking you are somebody who's reliable, who works good in a team, who sees the job through to the end, isn't leaving shit like undone and going home. You're there every day, like that. You're able to communicate well with everybody. You're able to do the thing that you've been hired to do. And if you're not able to do it, you ask for help and you do what you need to do to learn to do this thing.
In this
Right?
case, you're
It's much
describing
more.
like,
It's much more than just showing up at a job for 35 hours a week.
but in
So
this
are
case,
we-
all of these. Or sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it feels a little bit then like we're conflating work ethic with like overall principles of good employee or good worker, like of like fulfilling the full role. Whereas typically, in my understanding at least, when we talk about work ethic, there's a precise like level of things that we're specifically talking about, which is typically like some of what you mentioned, but not all of it, right? Like the pieces of like good, honest communication doesn't really connect to good work ethic inherently. It's more about like speed, efficiency, and reliability. I would say like those are kind of the main things. And then like putting in the extra sweat, like if there's an extra job that needs to be done, being the first one to like jump for it. So it's like much more around like labor and like investiture than just like some of these other traits. Because you've included things like communication skills, which I don't necessarily think is connected to work ethic.
I totally disagree. I think communication skills is the most important part of your work ethic. If you're working a job with other human beings, right? You can be
No,
somebody
so
who
that's something
puts
that
their
is
nose to the grindstone every day, right?
But
But if you can't work in a team and because you've got like an ego or whatever, you're not useful to
having
work
good
in the
Can I ask you a
communication
question,
skills
Doobie,
and
if
having a
I
good
may?
work ethic would be useful, but you could have a good work ethic without necessarily having good communication skills. That's why it's a conflation. These things don't rely upon
well, I
each
think
other. They're not
Doobie's
the same.
definition is more broad. You could,
Yeah, I'm
in a
trying
lot
to.
of industries, yeah, you definitely need communication.
Right, but
in
so
order
then
to
if
do
you're
your job well.
yeah, but if you're expanding it to the category, this is another difference I'd like to make is in that conception, like good communication skills, work ethic. If we're conflating these things to that degree, then work ethic in this case is actually
Everything
being
that's
defined as
good.
like everything that's, or if more specifically than that, everything that's useful to an employer. But that's being utility to an employer. This is my whole point. The utility that you serve to an employer is not a good, if that's what we're conflating the term to mean, that is not in any means like by what we value as a person, like how we judge the value of a person. And I don't think utility to an employer is a good metric by which to
I
like,
don't-
infer
So there's a lot going
qualities
on
I don't
here.
think
If
that
I-
makes
if
any
I may interject.
Let Wick jump
Well,
in
'cause
and
Doobie's
back to
specific. Oh,
Doobie.
sorry.
If I may interject, because I have some clarifying questions to ask. So, when we talk about work ethic and things like that, can I ask you, Doobie, what would you feel about someone who isn't paid, who isn't employed, but they complete a lot of projects? They help around the house. They have a lot of side projects they're doing that haven't resulted in getting paid for it for whatever reason, whether it's just not marketable or what have you. But they enjoy doing it. They work all the time. They're always busy. They're always doing something. There's always helping others. They're just not employed. They're not paid. My question here is, would you consider that good work ethic?
Sure. I mean,
Sure.
yeah,
So
that's fine.
we're separating the employment from being a good worker and things like that. And even though this person has good work ethic, they're not contributing to the GDP, so to speak. They're not contributing to the overall economy, at least not directly,
I
right?
think
Yeah, it's not so much about them contributing to the GDP. So somebody can do all those things you said, right? And they don't need to take, right? They're not taking from society in any way while they're doing this because maybe they have money set aside or something, and they're bored, so they do a bunch of charity work. I would say that that's like they're like in a different playing field, right? They're not somebody who who I'm assuming is getting up at like 4 a.m. in the morning to grind away at this project. And if they are, then yeah, I'd say that they have good work ethic, but they're in a separate group of people, I think. Right. So what typically when we're talking about like the American work ethic and the American work, we're not talking about people who do a bunch of charity work and they work really hard at it.
I guess the reason I'm asking this is to kind of suss out exactly how much you tie value to employment and value to employers and value to the system
It's
to
less
a
about
person.
that and more about so what somebody's work ethic, I said this earlier, it tells me a lot about who they are as a human being, right? So I said if the way that somebody works toward a thing they say is important to them, right? Whether it's they're building a retirement, building a stable foundation for their families, for their children, just building toward like leisure time for themselves, right? Whatever it is. If it's the charity work, building toward that charity work and doing the work that's necessary to be done for that project to be completed. The way that they work toward that, this thing that they say they give a fuck about, tells me a lot about who they are as a person. Right.
Right, but
It
you
doesn't
added, you
necessarily have to
snuck
be.
an
It doesn't
extra,
necessarily have to be them adding to the GDP.
but you
But
snuck
it
an
feels like
extra
to me you're
network-
mistaking
point there,
competence.
right? You
It
snuck
feels
an
like you're
extra,
mistaking competence with like ethic,
right?
right? Because
well,
it does.
Hold on. Pan.
Okay, yeah. It feels to me to be like you are mistaking, or not mistaking, but conflating ethic and like performance ability. Because I can think of someone who does all this stuff, does contribute to society, really good at their job. They're still pretty lazy. They do the bare minimum, but they're just so, like, let's say, intelligent. There are these people that I've seen before. You see them, they don't work as hard as everyone else, but they're just so naturally talented that they do perform more. Would you say that this person has a lower work ethic, or because the fact
Yeah,
that
I'd
their
say they have a
performance
worse
is so
work.
high? Okay, so
They're-
the
yeah, if they're
performance
not-
isn't the
that's
determining
kinda
factor
like-
then.
It's not. Yeah, it's not just a performance. It's the way that they're doing this, right? So if they're, for example, if that same person, they are just kind of going through the paces because that's all they need to do because they're so intelligent, so good at this job. And they're showing up like right on the dot on time and leaving right when the day ends, like at 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. or whatever it is, versus a person who is there an hour early because they're not so good at this job, but they need to do it. So they're an hour early and they're an hour late, right? Because they want to make sure that they did it correctly. Right? I would say the second person has much better work ethic.
So I
but
guess it feels like we're still conflating work ethic. Like we are tying this moral thing, and it's basically like anything that we see as moral in the workplace, we're tying it to. And I'm also honestly really concerned with your statement that work ethic tells me a lot about character, because I know like some of the most like abusive piece of shits might be really good. They might even be workaholics. Like they're not just good workers. They like take it to the really far extreme. And lots of workaholics, to be honest, are commented as being really good workers and having a good work ethic. It's why a lot of people with workaholics issues often rise to the top of their work field as well, because they invest so many hours and they do a pretty efficient job because that's what they obsess about. But they might also be like a piece of shit. They might like lie to their friends and family. They might like take advantage of people in their thing. And so like conflating work ethic with character overall, I think is dangerous. There might be some indicatives, right? For sure. But I really want to make sure you're not saying that these are one to run, right? If somebody has a good work ethic, they're most likely a pretty good person too.
This is why earlier, like I included like communication, the ability to work in a team. I would include things like honesty, integrity. All these things I'd include in my definition what makes a good work ethic, right? So it's not just your ability to get the job done. So if somebody is an asshole, but they're able to get the job done, right? That they're not as useful to me as somebody who can get the job done, but also work well within the team and treat people kindly, and that I can trust them to be honest and to have integrity. Right. So this is why, like when I think of work ethic, I'm thinking of all these other things.
But so the problem I would say with talking about it in that way, then, and I guess is sort of the point that I've been trying to make, is that when you talk about work ethic in that way, and you combine like the utility that you serve to a worker, and you conflate that with like things like honesty and integrity and like moral values about a person like that, because you run into a big problem. Because in the examples that you gave, you described someone like preaching an ideal, claiming to like care about something, claiming to have work ethic, etc., and then like not backing that up, right? Where that's like the violation there is like a moral violation of hypocrisy, and in that way it's the hypocrisy that's to some degree says something about the person. But the thing is that a lack of work ethic, and this is my final point, is that the problem with talking about things in this way is that a lack of work ethic doesn't necessarily tell you basically anything about a person other than that they're, well, for one, they're not going to be as useful to a company who wants to get money out of them. But that's not necessarily a morally bad thing.
Sure, I have two questions, one for Erudite and one for everyone. You mentioned earlier, Erudite, in your statement to Doobie that some people who are workaholics, as you called them, can be abusive in certain ways. Do we consider someone who is, because I've seen this situation before in various workplaces that I've been a part of, someone who does put in that extra effort, who has what Doobie would consider at least very strong work ethic. They're always there. They're working overtime every time. And one of the things that they tend to do, at least in my experience, is pressure others in their workspace to work as hard as them, even though they don't want to. Would we consider that a form of like abuse? Maybe abuse is the wrong word here, right?
Probably not. I'm more so speaking like, I'm not saying workaholics are abusers either, right? I'm saying a workaholic doesn't tell me more or less likely whether they're going to be a good parent or a good friend or a good interpersonal, because the way that you engage at work can be different than how you engage with your friends and can be different than how you engage with your home life, right? And so, like, this is why when we conflate work ethic to moral character of an individual, it feels really dangerous, because in work, you are the most motivated every single day to do your best job and show the best behavior that your like employer wants, because they're paying you for it. Whereas in family, there's a lot less repercussion. If, say, you're dishonest with your family, that's going to have like less tangible effects than if you're dishonest with your boss and can potentially get fired, right? And so, like, conflating these two things feels like exactly like the issue that I have with a lot of people in kind of the workforce, is that we do conflate, hey, you're a really good worker, that must also mean you're a really good person. And it's like, these are probably correlated, but I don't even know to what extent. Like, I don't think it's even a large correlation.
Okay, so my second question would be, and again, this is to everyone here. So say we have someone who does not have a good work ethic. Say for whatever reason they just are lazy. They don't like to work. They don't like to put forth a lot of effort. They'll do the bare minimum maybe and things like that. Or maybe they don't work at all. Maybe they are, as Doobie would call them, leech or polite pan, I guess, leeches on the system, right? Should we should they be required to work in order to live, to have the basic necessities of life? Should it, because in the American culture at least, we have that kind of system where even if you are out of work or getting unemployment, you do have to be looking for another job, at least in the states I've been in, where I've been unemployed, right? So should we use that as a requirement? Is that a good thing that we require this, or should we have something like a UBI or something that would alleviate that? What do you think?
So I think we're in a point in our society where we are asking ourselves questions like that, and I don't necessarily have a perfect answer about UBI, but I think like the fact that we are moving into a point in our society where questions about UBI are like becoming more and more practically reasonable to raise, the nature of that sort of reveals itself, that like it reveals the more underlying question to what you're asking, right? Which is, if it's not going to fuck up the system for everyone else and destroy our ability to like exist and live, which is the kind of society we're at least getting closer to if we're not becoming already there, is that wrong of us to let people live without necessarily having to work one-to-one for their existence? And it like this is part of the problem, right? Because like I think generally speaking, I don't see how we can square with our moral systems as a society. Like I don't see how that you can basically square that with any disagreement about the idea that if we could get away without working, that we should allow people some extent to be able to exist without having to tie their existence to labor.
Well, the problem is we shouldn't be
do so.
I feel like we shouldn't be incentivizing people to take out from society but not to put in. If too many people do that, if too many people take out of society but don't put in, society's not going to have anything for people to take out anymore. So I do think at a basic level, society benefits when people put in more than they get out. Society is hurt when people take out more than they put in, just like from a sort of like
the opposite end of that is not necessarily true. Because it means when you say like, well, no. So for example, when you say people are hurt, right? What do you mean? Like, what if someone doesn't have to work and now they live a happier life, or they have to work less at least, and they live a happier life, more engaging, more fulfilling. They spend more time at home. They raise better kids because they can spend more time with their kids, which all sorts of studies show the like evidence for that. They spend more time spend more time with friends. They develop more meaningful relationships. They have more time to spend on hobbies, which can contribute to the world in other ways. Like there's
obviously
a whole bunch of
for them, right?
Yeah, it's great.
Like,
for
Yeah,
that,
it
and
sounds
potentially
like
also
someone
a
gives me free money, that's absolutely fantastic.
But
for me.
this
I
is why
love getting
I
free
say,
shit, right?
but I'm just saying though
Speaking of, please
that you
donate.
can't represent it
to
as a
Prime.
binary, right? Like if that's why the practical concerns matter, because we're
Something free
starting to
about
move
that.
into a point in our society where it's becoming more and more practical to give each other to give other humans room to like choose a little bit of flexibility in the degree to which they have to work to exist. And so far as we can practically sustain that, you have to ask yourself, like, I think there's room, if we can practically sustain it, for people to benefit from that. I mean, what, like,
Well,
Yeah, but
are we
I mean, what
seriously
you
gonna
just
say we don't
described
want people
is
to be
a
happier?
what you just described is like the very fancy, comfortable life built on the backs of people trudging along to keep you afloat, right?
So
So
let me ask you a
I think
question.
what Pan is describing is like this responsibility we have to the society that we're in to keep doing the things to grease the gears to keep it running, right? And if that means you need to work, right, to get some of the benefits of the society, then that's what you need to do.
Well, one of
To be
the
clear, I think
issues
if
we're
you can take
having, at
advantage of
least,
society, you should. I don't
well,
Let me
fault
ask you.
anyone for
sure.
taking
But
advantage of
one
society.
of the issues that we're having, at least in America, I can't speak for Canada, but at least in America, one of the issues that we're having in the modern day is that there are more people than there are jobs that need doing. That there are jobs that need. You disagree? If you
Absolutely.
could read Utopia for Realists, that's a really good book. I forget the author's name. If you read Deaths of Despair and the Future of Capitalism in 2020, written by Stanford scholars, excellent book. I suggest you read it. And they absolutely posit that with automation and with the rise to the different types of economies coming, they are just not enough like things needing doing. We are making up positions for have people have a job that don't necessarily need to be done. So this idea that we don't have like that there are more jobs than there are people doesn't bear out. Now that when we
There are
look
an
at
infinite amount of jobs. There's
when
always
we
something
if I
productive
may
you can
finish,
do with
Well,
your
that's
time.
why
when
we
we
stimulate the economy. That's what we're saying.
micro-analyze it, and like in certain fields, yes, there's shortages. Yes, there's shortages in nurses, there's shortages in other fields. But overall, we are especially as technology advances, we're running into the problem where there's just not enough work to go around. And I think that when it comes down to it, we are reaching a point where the culture of work is clashing with this like there's just not enough to do. We don't have to work as much time, and so we're sitting there making shit up just because we feel we need to work to live and we need to be strong workers and things like that.
I don't
That's
know.
absolutely not true. There's always something productive you can be doing with your time. It's true that automation does take away jobs. However, after the automation takes away the most or the most productive jobs, there are still jobs left over. Everything you do can be productive. There's no such thing as like a society in which there's nothing more to do. I mean, we can take a
You
look
never
at this
heard of
throughout-
busy work?
But
I-
nobody's
I-
there is
arguing
busy
that.
work, but I'm not talking about busy work.
Nobody's arguing about a society that exists where no one has to work ever and we can all just lounge on laps of luxury and eat our grapes, right? What we're talking about is here's specifically what's going on. And a lot of economists and psychologists and technology researchers know that as specifically as our economy gets more complex, as we automate more, the jobs that are going to become larger and larger are people who run these automated systems. However, the IQ threshold for working in these jobs is progressively increasing, and it's a serious actual problem that most like psychological researchers on stuff like this and like certain like economists that know about this as well genuinely aren't sure what to do, because right now there are threshold IQ cutoffs in certain workforces that test for it where people are non-functional anymore. And the problem is that automation is going to create it so that like, yes, we can infinitely create future jobs because the human mind is creative and diverse and we can make new workforces and stuff like that. But the reality that like everyone must work to survive is becoming less and less of an actual true thing. And the Protestant work ethic, which is where all of this comes from, is born on a population where if people weren't almost all contributing, survival was literally at stake. But with automation, with fertilizer, with technology, we're getting automated farms now. The reality is that our survival isn't at stake. What's now at question is like, how do people find purpose? Because work has occupied for most people a sense of purpose and contribution. And that's the big gap that we're going to potentially have, is how do we make sure that we give people jobs that are meaningful? And I think that's an issue that we run into all the time, is that people are in these infinite numbers of jobs that are pretty deeply unmeaningful and can often be replaced by just like a self-checkout machine and stuff like that.
And
that- I
I
mean,
do
we're
agree
already
that
we all
it's
know of
psychological.
positions in
Code
companies and
discourse
things
with
like that. We
truckers.
all know of positions in companies that are just that serve no purpose. That they're
Like
there
what?
just to have a person fill a seat, right? In the military, this
Like
is
what?
especially bad, right? I
How about you
remember.
just get rid of that
corporation?
position?
What
Corporates
companies
want
are paying
profit.
people to do things that, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like why would, like what job are you talking about? It's just like totally useless. It's
Government
there.
bureaucrat.
Oh,
maybe
thank you,
That's not-
Pan. Thank you for
So
that.
the issue is with every technological jump, we also have a job crunch because as we automate things, something that took 10 humans to do, usually one machine can do. Sometimes it's something that 500 humans were required for. Now we can do it with a tractor, right? Now we
Sure,
can
but
do
there's
it.
work in other fields, right? Like, yes, if the only job was
Yeah, just change
was
jobs,
in
man. The
The
agriculture,
people
right?
who can
Some-
work like labor sometimes can't work in other fields, particularly when they get older. They're harder to retrain, and nobody's really dealing with the IQ threshold that we also have to contend with as a society.
So hold on. I think
Sometimes
hold on. I think you're saving Wick from something, Erudite, right? So Erudite, your point I think stands. That you're talking about in terms of like hard labor out there and us getting machinery or some sort of computer assistance to help lower the workforce. However, what Wick was talking about was different. He was saying specifically that companies have massive redundancies and they're just paying a person like
Massive? I don't know about
$50,000 a year just going out the door, not for no particular reason. Now,
There are
I'm
plenty.
sure there are companies that are being like highly efficient, right? Like you can always be more efficient. But to say that companies are just having people there who literally don't need to be there,
I
like
can
what
give
are
you
you talking
examples,
about?
very
Okay, please.
specific examples. Sure. So, my father works in a company. He's a contractor and things like that. He's been a contractor for Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and things like that. And the people he work with, a lot of them, they don't want to fire them, right? Like they built a relationship, right, with their company that they don't want to fire them. So they give a lower paying kind of like a cush position or a job. And this happens all the time because they like them, because they have built a relationship. We all acknowledge that there's the good old boy system at work, right? We all acknowledge that that's the case, that this happens. And you have a lot of cush jobs going to these things because they just like them, right? And it's not a lot.
Wait,
and,
hold
you know,
on.
it's
So
not
does your
the
father-
thing.
does
It
your father
happens
do
all the
zero
time,
work?
This
right?
is
Does
the-
your
I
father
think-
does your father do zero work? Like what are they paying
My
him to
father's
do?
a contractor. He doesn't work like directly for them, right? But he works with the people in the
But
corporation.
does he do work
I
for this
think-
company that's paying him money?
Yeah,
Oh,
but I'm
then-
not talking about my dad's
He's
job.
not talking about his dad. Yeah, he's talking
Yeah,
about his other
I think
company.
that this,
Okay.
I think
And what
this
do you-
is probably industry specific because when we talk about these military industrial companies, their customer isn't the person. They don't have to be efficient on a market. All they have to do is charge the right price to the government. It's fundamentally different, I would say, working for something that sells their product directly to the government than working for someone who sells directly to the public. Because while the government might just raise taxes if a jet is twice as expensive, in the private market, if my vanilla latte becomes twice as expensive, I'm gonna do something else. I don't need a vanilla latte that bad.
So we can agree that there are times, right? Although, like, to try to ground this a little bit, we can agree that there are times where like technological innovation can create jobs that keep up to some extent with the jobs that it replaces, but there are also times where it doesn't. I mean,
I
we're
don't think
already
that's
like our politicians have already been talking for a long time about the fact that like some insanely huge percentage, just for one example, of our trucker population is like men, and this and it's like one of the highest sources for like half the population of their income, and like this is. We're already talking about ways of protecting those jobs with legislation that like limit that like slow the degree to which automation is introduced into truckers. This is one example.
Yeah, I mean, politicians
part
are
of that-
talking about that, but just
Right,
because
but part
one
of that-
group wants a job, I'm not saying that the job
Look,
isn't.
corporations-
It's
This is an
It's
example
not
of
just
how this could bear
politicians,
out
it's
a problem.
economists, it's
Right,
psychologists,
exactly.
it's multiple experts in multiple fields talking about this issue. This idea that there's just like limitless, endless numbers of jobs available isn't totally borne out, right? Because when you do technological jumps, you crunch the number of jobs available, and
In
a
that
lot of
field,
these
only in that
technical,
field.
but every field is
You do
experiencing this.
sometimes.
We started
Nope.
with labor, but now legal companies are starting to outsource. Paralegals are actually at threat. Paralegals might become a pretty redundant job to get. Even my training as a psychometrist, they're projecting within the next 10 years are going to be basically garbage because we'll have systems that we've designed that do it better because computers analyze things better. So like
Yeah.
Better than
this is
judges
happening
sometimes in
everywhere.
certain things, right? I mean,
mean-
like that's what was being talked about a while ago. AIs in some situations are being deployed to replace certain people in the judicial system. Like sometimes they may come to better determinations more accurately and more representatively, to better determinations than judges, and that can be borne out with evidence, right? These are just we don't have to say that it's always happening to recognize that it can happen, does happen to an extent, and it's going to happen more. And that's a problem, right? And this is why, like imagine, right? Imagine, right? Because I don't think any of us think that like literally no one would ever want to do anything productive in society if suddenly they had the option not to, right? So this is the sort of like hypothetical that we're getting closer and closer to. Imagine, for example, thought experiment, that we had 100 people who liked working in a system and collaborating with each other and working harder to get more, and then 100 people who just want to lounge around and exist as best they can and just not have to work to live and live a meager existence, that are happy doing that, right? Like if we could do that, if we could just practically do that and everyone could afford it and everyone was happy, right? Are we going to look at that and say, no, that's wrong, that's bad? Like this is the problem that you run into when you start to ascribe these like moral weights to just engaging in the system, being productive, being a good worker. This is the heuristic blockade you're going to run into, because we're getting closer and closer to have to answer these problems ourselves as a society.
Okay, so I feel like we're like we've drifted quite a bit, right? So I want to try to refocus us. What we're talking about now is like, you know, the work ethic tied to morals, and talking about a society in which, you know, automation has made people a certain portion of the workforce redundant, and are those people bad, right? Let's maybe narrow our focus down to people who are employed in the society that we have right now, and whether that environment that they're working in is itself a problem. So
right, and so,
I'm gonna hold on. So yeah, and so I want to so there was another person I wanted to have on this panel, and unfortunately I couldn't get them. Another person who works super hard, right? So my friend GSU Gambit, I'm going to be channeling him, right? And his opinions the best I can. It's a person I've argued with a lot, so I'm quite familiar. So I hope he is happy with the results. But there are he works in the field of software engineering, right? And something he says that I agree with is that with software engineering, it's very much what you put in, you get out, right? Is software engineering, you have to learn the language. You learn the language, right? You learn the tips and tricks. You learn how to optimize. There is a set path for you to get better, for you to upgrade your skill, but you just have to put in the work. Right, you have to take the tough projects. You have to push your boundaries, right? Whether it's in the language you're familiar with or languages you're not, right? And you have to be able to ask for help when you don't have the skill, right? Which happens plenty of times. But if you're in an environment that you can do that, you can ask for help, then you should absolutely do that. And the results will show up. And so those who have a good work ethic, even of the more narrow ways that the rest of you are defining it, those who have a good work ethic tend to go far, tend to rise, and there's plenty of money and remuneration to be had there. And so why shouldn't we have a culture that encourages that? Now, I would say that personally, I would say that not all jobs have it so that necessarily you're putting in work and you will get rewarded, like you're working at a McDonald's, right? And I think maybe this was probably Doopy's point previously, right? If you're working at like a Burger King, then you can be a great worker and being valuable to your employer, but whether that will bounce back towards you, it's probably not, unfortunately, right? But shouldn't we, in jobs that allow for growth, shouldn't we be encouraging people to have that good work ethic, to put in that extra time, right? Because, for instance, when it comes to software engineering, I've done like that myself, and like I'll take my work home with me, right? Usually I was working from home, but like I'll take my work home with me. When there's an a problem, like I couldn't sleep. Like I couldn't do anything else. I would like not do all my normal stuff. I'd be focusing on this, right? Like why can't I like get over this hill? Like what is blocking me here? And then until I solved that mystery, like I couldn't let it go. And wouldn't we want that out of an employee or coworker?
Yeah, I mean, we would all want that, right? But we have to balance the interest of the society with the interest of the individual. It might be great for society. Workaholics are amazing for society. I'd love to live in a society where everyone was a workaholic besides me and my friends, and we could just chill and do, fun shit all day. Obviously, the most productive people in society are going to be putting a lot more into society. However, I think that there's a limit on this, and we should be understanding that people don't want to be workaholics a lot. Now, sometimes for short periods of time, yeah, you can be a workaholic. If it's something you really love, it's pretty easy to be a workaholic. But I do think that there should be some understanding that you don't have to work to the bone to contribute to society. You don't have to, just because it helps other people, you have to think about yourself a little bit as well. You don't want to be like a happiness sponge.
Well, this is why I would say that like it's useful for us to like allow it's a useful tool for people to engage in. It's good to like know that you can have a good work ethic and be rewarded for it, right? But and that is a tool in our society because we live in a world where we cannot just live for free. It's a useful tool to like be able to engage in those systems and get rewarded for your work ethic. But the thing is like being a workaholic being good for society, even that is that I know it's like a semantic sort of heuristic problem to have, but that phrasing right there is sort of the problem that I have, because a workaholic can be bad for society just as much as they can be good. Because we're talking like it's possible, for example, that we could be talking about a workaholic. And this is why flexible work hours, I love the idea of flexible work hours, because the idea of being a workaholic can be great for society. And it can be good, like you say, balancing it against the interests of the individual, because there are individuals out there who are going to like being workaholics. It's not necessarily wrong to be a workaholic, but it's also not necessarily wrong to be a workaholic. And there's probably a lot of workaholics, I'm sure we can all agree, who feel pressured into being a workaholic as opposed to enabled and freed by being a workaholic, right? And we want to give, like, when we're talking about what benefits a society, right? What against the interest of the many, like, there's, we could get into the economics of like decreased work weeks and stuff, which actually could stand to benefit us economically. But the truth is that if we're talking about the underlying like narratives here and the like values at play, I think that we run into this weird place where, just sort of like you said, we need to be able to separate these things, but it's for the reason that we balance the interest of the individual against the many. Like GDP is not the end all be all that we want to like, for not end all metric that we want to use for successful
Let's
society.
start with something a bit more basic. If a person works harder in a job, who shows up, and not even is the smartest, right? Because I think David made a really good point, in that there's some people who are just like straight up talented, who may not give a shit, but like there's a person who's less talented, but is putting their all into their job. But like if a person's working harder at this job, they should be rewarded more. Do we all agree on that?
No.
I disagree, and I'll tell
Really?
you why. I think that for a corporation at least, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how hard their employees work. It matters what they get done, right? It matters what they produce and the value they produce. And if
No,
they can do that,
sure, that part. No, that part too. So they're producing. That's what I mean too. They're also like producing.
okay. So in your hypothetical, you have two workers, both produce the same amount per hour or whatever, and one's willing to work 50 hours, the other's 40, right? And so you think the 51 should be paid more?
No, just putting in if
Like promoted more quickly. Like
Sure, the one
I'm
that-
seeing this as like rising the chain, right? Like
Okay.
somebody who works harder typically is going to get promoted more because they're more valuable to the
Yeah, that's fine.
workplace, and that makes sense to me.
Well-
So that
well-
would be the reward you're talking about, right? Like promotion, job raises, something like that.
well,
Yeah, I don't-
promotion and raises would be the reward. But if you're in the example you're talking about, Wick, I wouldn't count the person who is, in terms of my perspective as a as an owner,
Employer.
I wouldn't say that a person who's doing 50 hours and producing the same amount as a person doing 40 hours is more valuable, right? Like you're just taking longer to accomplish the same
No, I
amount.
mean like they're willing to work like per hour. They each produce 10 units of work. I don't
Oh,
know.
I see.
And so the person who's willing to work 10 hours more is producing more as well, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
they're
okay. All
willing
right.
to go overtime.
Okay, sure, sure,
Is
sure.
what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah. Then that person, if they're doing more for the company, for the team, for us to be successful, right? It's like
Sure.
if my workers are valuable, assuming I'm not have people on the payroll, I'm just paying just cause, right? But if my workers are valuable, then I need them to produce so that we can all be successful, right? Like so, I can pay more, especially if we're talking about in a smaller business environment. Then it's crucial. So if you're willing to work harder, then why would I not promote you over the other person who may be doing a fantastic job, perfectly adequate, right? And is a point member of the team, but this other person is working hard. If I'm choosing between the two as to who to give a promotion, some sort of benefit, why wouldn't I choose the person who's working
Yeah,
harder?
there's no reason
Well,
not to, but it does run into a problem when it gets to scale. So if you announce there's a promotion coming up and you have these two workers, the one's like, oh, he's working 50, I got to work 60 now. The other turns that and says, no, I got to work 70, and it comes to this point where one or both can definitely burn themselves out and engage in very unhealthy work practices, right? So I think that there's two questions at play. One, what should the company do? And I think the company should pick whoever works harder in that thing. But the second one is, as a society and as a culture, is this healthy? And I would say no, it's not overall.
Well, we also have to
I
think like, what does the company want to cultivate? Like, I think in just the like closed circuit of a workplace, obviously we should probably reward competence, right? And I think part of competence would be to some extent also shown in work ethic specifically, right? And so I think bringing competence is valuable. I think valuing work ethic can be valuable for the employer specifically. And I think it's fair to reward that. But then employers also have to think about, what are your goals, right? Who are you promoting and why, and what are you trying to cultivate, right? So say you promote somebody who's got an excellent work ethic, but is kind of an interpersonal piece of shit, right? That might lead to overall the whole system, all of the people working under them being less productive because their manager is an asshole, right? And so like, I think companies have to just kind of like weigh this, of like when they're promoting somebody specifically and giving like rewards, what specifically is for. But yeah, I think if somebody's like contributing more to a specific area like work, they should be rewarded for doing more of that work. I think that's totally fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd go a little bit further than you guys. I think that we should solely be rewarding based on output, less than effort. I think that effort is just a subjective evaluation of how it's subjective. It's towards the individual, right? Like we might value tasks very differently. If you think of society's evaluation of people like garbage men, it's pretty low. But because their job is important, so people might not consider garbage men very meritorious. That said, their
that's part of
compensation is relatively high because it's important work that needs to be done, and picking up trash isn't sexy, but it's extremely important. So I do think that in a free society, it's much better that people are rewarded based to the benefit that they bring to others, rather than people's subjective evaluation of their merits. Because I think a lot of people, there's no exact way to measure merits. So I think that there is an exact way to measure how much they can help society and help others. So I do think
that's
that's
why,
what we
though,
should use.
these things sort of work naturally, though, right? Because what happens is at like the personal level, like on the societal level, because we've like recognized that like there are certain things that benefit that like can advantage an employer. One of those things is work ethic. Other things are competency, right? Which combine to like to some extent to like create their overall output to the job, right? Like that balances itself out with importance in terms of like the supply and demand of a job market, which is why sometimes the importance of a job does necessitate some degree of like raising the wages to find slightly more competent workers so that you can like select from a higher degree of the workforce to make sure the job gets done well. And these things levy themselves out naturally as a society. But we're at a point to where like, yeah, I mean, not to loop back to the grounding of the argument, but like we're at a point in our society where like we don't even have to talk about like anything like UBI or abolishing work in our society. Like we can just talk about the ways in which we are hurt by having a culture that overburdens, that overemphasizes the enforcement of engaging with a certain degree of work ethic as an individual, and the degree to which like your value is like diminished by not engaging in that work ethic, right? And there's room, I think, in our society to pull back on that because we're getting better and better at practically allowing that space in our society.
A lot of times, I've seen in the workplace when I was working for a company called Fiserv. It's a company that worked with the banks, a lot of the things was the enforcement wasn't from the managerial level. It was amongst the other workers. If you weren't working as hard, quote unquote, as other people, there was a lot of social pressure to perform. Like if you weren't willing to come in on Saturday and on your weekend, and everyone else was, even though it wasn't required, you definitely were going to get shamed in the workplace and things like that. That was definitely a thing that happened. And I think that again, as we were required to work less because we have better technology, like less hours to do the same amount of work, there's still going to be this social pressure, right? Social society and culture lags behind technological advancements in almost every case, right? And so you could see these you know, this harm that people are doing, and it's this rise in nihilism, this rise in that, again, this is anecdotal, this is just what I have observed, this rise in apathy, this rise in resentment, because people see that they're putting in all these hours, but it doesn't seem to be gaining anything more, right? It doesn't seem to be getting them much more, and I think that really is a problem, and that's one of the downsides to this work ethic that we have in America, right?
The
Where
labor market
we
shortage in
overly
certain
pressure
areas,
people.
right?
I think it's demoralizing, right? Like I view work ethic like athleticism. I think it's cool. I think it's respect worthy. I think it's kind of dope when you have it. And it's predictive of you being successful in certain venues in your life, right? So if you're super, super athletic, that's going to be really helpful if you want to become a star athlete, right? And there's other things that are also going to be helpful, which is why I have no problem with work ethic. I think it's cool. I have an issue though when we conflate all levels of morality and conflate all levels of more characteristic with work ethic. For example, your work ethic has probably very little to do with whether or not you're a really good mom, right? And I think as a society, we'd probably agree that good moms, right? To say like, oh, good moms are just moms who work hard. That's not fucking true at all necessarily, right? A large part of motherhood is like nurturance and like patience. And if we're going to conflate work ethic with just everything that's good, it's such a fucking useless word. Let's just get rid of it and talk about the specifics of work ethic then, right? Work ethic has to talk about a specific prescriptions of behavior, right? And I don't think you can capture motherhood very well under that, or like being a really good friend, right? Or a multitude of other things that I would say we would all agree are moral things that we value and respect, right? Somebody's ability to be like the social glue of their family and support others through their life is something that I think we would all say we respect in another person and we value. Just like I would say, we can respect and value work ethic, but we shouldn't do so at the cost of other things. And I think in our society right now, we do. We do put work ethic on a pedestal.
I guess let's.
Yeah,
I
I don't.
kind of want to get into like some more specifics. So, like, what are some of the things that you're talking about? Because it seems like we all agree that work ethic is valuable. We all agree that work ethic isn't like the only thing that's valuable. The disagreement seems to be, you know, how much society overvalues work effort. And I'd like to know, yours and some of the rest of the panel's thoughts about examples of how we overvalue work effort in society.
Sure. Well, as I said, I think this comes into it's less of a managerial culture and more of a worker culture and things like that. And I've seen this in almost every job I've been in, right, where I've worked with other people. I mean, is that the people who are working harder pressure those who aren't, whether or not the people who aren't working harder have other issues that they're dealing with, whether or not it's healthy for them. It doesn't matter if they're working putting in 60 hours a week and the other guy's only putting in 40. They're going to have a lot of resentment towards them. There's going to be a lot of work issues and interpersonal issues that arise from that, and I think that that's a problem. And it's especially as people have different levels of amount they can work before having burnout and breakdown. And because people are pushing themselves so hard, we see a lot of rise in health problems, a lot of rise in mental anxiety, a lot of rise in all these other issues that, again, this isn't the only reason that this is rising, but it is a contributing factor.
Well, and especially if you're asking me for specific examples of the ways in which like the demand for work can go too far as a society, it might be easy to take these things for granted because there are already ideological underpinnings like that and precedents in our society that we accept without even thinking about it because it's so automatic. Like the idea of a union, right? And we can argue over the efficacy of unions, right? But we basically all would agree with the basic concept of a union in the ideal, being able to like have the workers represent their ideas and pit that against the benefit of the company, right? We already like we can already see like look at the discourse that's happening in the gaming industry around burnout and crunch culture, right? Look at these concepts are already built into our society, where we allow these interests to be pitted against one another, right? And so I just don't think it's too much of a if this distinction already exists in our society, I guess. So I don't think it's too much to like just point to that and realize that like the point to those is just easy examples of if you're going to ask me for some in our society of where this overreach has already been addressed, right? We're already addressed in society and we benefit from it to some degree.
But it sounds like you're saying that it has been addressed, like stuff like unions, stuff like all of this stuff is addressing the inherent like overvalue of work effort, right? Like the idea that there's
so the only reason I bring
forces that are keeping down work effort seems to me to be an indication that it's at its proper, the societal value of work effort is at a proper place.
Well, just for an example, I wouldn't say that unions unanimously do a perfect job of addressing the concerns of the workers in a lot of situations. But sometimes they do a good job, right? Sometimes they do. And the thing is that we, without getting into like a debate over unions, there's some degrees people generally will agree. There's some times where unions benefit workers. And there are at least in theory times where they can, right? And if we could have unions fulfill their ideals, that would be a generally good thing, right? And I'm just saying, like, the only reason I bring this up isn't getting into a union debate, but just to respond to, like, if you're going to ask me for examples of in our society times where, like, we've already decided, like, oh, hey, this is a problem in the sense that, like, this is something worth addressing, there's already precedents for that kind of thing in our like societal discourse already. It just might be easy to miss them.
That seems separate from work ethic, right? So predatory companies that might take advantage of.
It's not separate from work ethic if you define.
I think it is. I think it is.
The company.
Wait, hold on. I don't define work ethic as everything productive to the company. I don't define it as everything good in the world either, right? So this is what you guys were saying earlier is kind of silly. But I think that a predatory company willing to take advantage of somebody's willingness to work or need to work because they need the money that this company is paying them, right? It's kind of separate from the conversation of work ethic in general, I think. Bad companies exist that'll take advantage of you if you let them do it. Definitely, the companies have a profit motive that definitely will shit all over your need for family time if you let them do it. Right.
Do you see how describing work ethic as both something that like showing up on time, working hard, getting a lot of work done, being like caring a lot about your job, and also describing it as like honesty, integrity, like generally things that we ascribe to being a good person? Do you see how this is an example of
but this is why I include integrity and honesty and the ability to work well on a team in my like box of work ethic, right? Exactly the example.
That's the problem.
Hold on. It makes it a useless definition.
I don't think it makes it useless whatsoever because Erudite, you mentioned earlier, hey, what if the wrong person gets promoted? Someone who has terrible interpersonal skills gets promoted, even though they've got a good work ethic by your definition of work ethic, right? Well, with my definition of what a work ethic includes, they wouldn't get promoted because they'd have a terrible work ethic, even if they're willing to do the quote unquote work, right? Because in this work environment, they're bad on the team, they treat people like shit, whatever it is.
But
right?
so,
I don't
Can you
think
maybe
hold on. I want Erudite to respond, but like I think what Doobie is trying to say is that he's not saying that this subset of traits, right, which includes coming in on time and maybe staying longer and just working harder, is not indicative of those other good moral traits, right? Like that you are a good person or honest person. He's saying that to be to get the categorization of like a great worker or a person with a great work ethic, you have to also have those traits, right? So that's also included in this subset.
Yeah,
so,
I think it's absolutely necessary.
But that's exactly why it's just a description of a good worker, right? And the thing is that an ideal worker for an ideal boss, because not all bosses are good, not all bosses are going to make all the same determinations as us. An ideal worker for an ideal boss in our society would partially be determined by being a good person, having honesty and integrity in some cases, because that is useful to an employer. But the thing is that when you combine these terms, it implies that they somehow correlate or rely on each other, that somehow having good work ethic, being like a hard worker, coming to work on time, like being reliable, that these are like necessarily tied to honesty, integrity, and like part of the same.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That's
you
usually
were
what
given an
work ethic
example a little bit ago
means.
of somebody who's a hard worker who comes in on time but treats everybody like shit, is dishonest, is unreliable in other ways. Right? I wouldn't say this person has a good work ethic.
But those are different things.
Right? So if we were going through a definition of work ethic,
wait.
No,
Can
what
I
I'm
just
saying,
jump in?
hey, you can be a good worker, quote unquote, right? You can show up on time and do the job, right? But still have a terrible work ethic, right? Because you're not doing all the other things that you need to do to be what's the word I'm looking for?
That's
compatible, productive,
but you just
efficient.
understand my argument.
Hold
There's
on.
a difference between what benefits the employer and what makes them a good person.
But
Wait,
no.
it's not just
He
being-
gets that.
All these things benefit the employer.
Yeah. No, I think he's saying that, being honest and having integrity, right? Yeah, those benefit the employer, but it's not that those things are indicative, right? Like or being.
They don't have those things because of their work ethic, right?
The problem is
No.
uses
They're not
Doobie's
saying that. He's not
definition.
saying that. He's saying
That's
that
just not
just
true.
a person
true.
who
But that's who
has that work
Ken,
ethic.
I guarantee you, if you were to look up the word work ethic,
I just did.
You would find tons of
please
definitions that
please
are
let me tell
exactly
you.
what I'm saying.
Please let me tell you.
All right,
Okay,
go ahead.
I looked it up. The way you're using work ethic isn't the way anyone uses it now or where it historically came from. Work ethic is an idea that comes from the New England Puritans specifically. It is a Protestant idea, which literally the phrase time is money comes from this movement, where they unironically believed that the labor force that you put out is indicative of your soul being saved. That is why there is a moral connection between labor output and moral character. Because if you're putting out a lot of character, it must mean that you really do love God. And if you really do love God, you're probably saved. That is why there's this inherent moral connection. If you Google it at all, Wikipedia, everything I looked at talks about how we connect a virtuous element of personal character to the labor output that they produce, right? And this is what I'm saying is unhealthy. This is an idea that comes from a Christian puritanical worldview that was harmful, and we should do away with it. The only difference is, rather than calling it the Protestant work ethic and that your soul gets saved, we have secularized it, but we haven't actually disentangled the moral value that we've inherited from our past. And that is how the word work ethic gets used, both historically and now very consistently.
I don't think you have to rely on like the Christian effort though, right? Like if you think if someone has a high work effort and is producing a lot, they are contributing to society more than someone who isn't. So I don't think this morality comes specifically from the fact that Protestants use this word to mean X, Y, or Z, right? Like I didn't know that
literally where
definition.
it comes from.
Well, it
just
might
to be
be,
clear,
but like
historically. And now what happens? You would probably agree that our society is rooted in Christian roots. Would you agree with that? That historically, most of the people that basically took over and were at the top were usually Christians, white Christians specifically. We would agree with that, right?
But I don't think the historic usage of the word has anything like inherent to do with the value.
The issue is that the norms you inherit from your history affect today. That is why there is still so many issues, for example, with systemic racism, because we've inherited a past of objective, blatant, aggressive racism that we're still dealing with today, even though we disagree with, for example, like phrenology, which tried to prove that like Black people's heads were different, which is why that they're lesser beings, right? We disagree with that, but that doesn't change that there's still systemic issues that arise from it. These norms don't just get released when we just like let go of God. We just tie the morality to something that's more secularized. And that's what we've done.
I mean, tying the morality to something more secular is like completely fine. Yeah, I think there is an inherent moral value to secularly contributing more to society. I don't think that there's this intrinsic link. If we talk about, systemic racism still being a problem after, tons and tons of explicit and severe racism for most of our history, I think that, that is still a problem that we have, but I don't think it's necessarily comparable to one word having a definition that was, grounded in Christian morals to the same word having the same moral meaning, but grounded in, I guess, secular morals. I don't
But you
see how
say-
that's
you see-
necessarily
you-
the
you-
same.
Okay,
But
so
it's the problem
if
when
I
you
may,
give a
So
statement like that.
Wick
someone
has been able
contributed-
to jump in for a while.
sure. I just want to interject. Like, regardless of the origins of the word, we can all acknowledge. I think that for a lot of people in society, not everyone. I'm not speaking that generally, right? But for a large portion of American society, they value work ethic, regardless of why they do it. But they put a lot of moral value onto work ethic to provide for people, family. It is you're seen as a good caregiver. There's a lot of reasons, whether it's religious or secular. It doesn't matter. We can acknowledge this exists. And one of the other reasons this is toxic is because of the social pressure that workers themselves put on each other to fulfill this work ethic allows a lot of companies who only have a profit motive, who only have a profit incentive, to exploit their workers, knowing that the workers themselves will pressure each other and enforce these, I think, unrealistic standards, right? These harmful standards that lead to burnout, that lead to crunch, that lead to all these things. It is part of the problem, and it's not the only facet here. It's not the only thing we need to solve, but it is a huge part of the problem today. Is that we moralize others. We look at those people who we think or view, we may be wrong, as working less than us, and we view them as lesser, especially if we're in the same job. This is just something that happens all across America in all industries that I have been a part of, and that I have talked to people who have been part of.
Do you think that's
do we
just
deny
moral?
this? Like,
Do
we
you think it's
this is
just
wrong?
moralizing, or do you think it's self-interest? Because from my experience,
Both.
when I have a
It's both.
lazy coworker, the reason I don't like them isn't because I have some ethic about, oh, they're not working hard enough and you have to work hard to survive. My reasoning why I don't like them is, oh shit, all the shit that they don't do, I'm gonna have to do. So I don't think necessarily that's something wrong to think, right? If your coworker isn't doing all of their responsibilities and or isn't working as
You're
hard as you,
just
and you have to pick up the
describing being
slack.
jealous.
That's not being
probably
jealous.
bad.
No,
No, I just-
that's not
really
being
quickly,
jealous at all.
so-
That's saying that you have to do more work than somebody else.
If the only thing that you're upset about is that someone else, you're having to do more work than someone else.
No, the thing
if that's all it is, or someone else is having to do more work than you, that's just
nothing to do with that. No,
That's literally
it's me having to do more work, right? Like let's
No,
say
yes, exactly.
if you need
If
to make
you're having to do
20,
more work
hold
than
up.
someone else
Let me
to
explain
get
this
the
to you.
same work
Let me
done,
explain
that's
this to
just
you.
jealousy.
If you have to make, if there are 2 employees who need to make 20 shirts, and one person is a very slow shirt maker, and they only make 5 by the time you've made 10, and you have to keep working, it makes sense that you're going to be mad because you're going to have to make more shirts, right? It's
But
not
Dan,
that,
let's not
oh, I'm
pretend.
so
You're
sad
not
that they
mad
only
at them,
made 5
you're mad at
shirts.
your
The
employer.
reason
Let's not pretend that that's the
It's
only
not
reason people are
five
getting
more.
mad here. Let's
It's
not
not
pretend
the
that
only reason, but
that
it's
happens,
a
yes, but there's a lot of people, who say, "Oh, this guy just he's only working 30 hours instead of 40. Man, he must be producing less," even though that's not true in a lot of cases. Oh, wow, I just hate him now. This happens like
So
Okay,
let's
so really
something
quickly,
I've heard
so
a
somebody
lot.
said it earlier.
Harder
Gibby,
for
Gibby, go
making
ahead.
more than you or
Gibby,
being able to work less
Gibby.
than you.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
somebody said earlier that nobody uses the definition of work ethic or thinks of work ethic the way that I do. First page of Google, I put 4 or 5 links in the group chat with a screenshot from one of those pages. Right, each one includes all the things that I'm describing when I talk about work ethic. So when I think of work ethic, I do include somebody's integrity, their honesty, their ability to work in a team, all these things. All that is in the work ethic box for me, just as it is for many people who work in professional spaces.
to be clear.
So I think it is. I think the issue is that you guys aren't using the commonly
It didn't
understood
say-
definition of
Here's
work
the
ethic.
issue.
So you
We
misheard us.
switched
You misheard
words
us. No one
halfway
said
through the
that. No one said no.
The original
No
word
one
was
said
effort, not
this is a
work
misquote.
ethic.
This is a misquote. No one said that you were misusing the word work ethic in a way that no one could understand.
That's
we're
not what I
saying
said.
no,
Well, you just misquoted me.
But
What
in a way that
Pan
no one
said
else-
is
in a
that
way that no one
what
else
Pan
is.
said is that nobody uses the word that work ethic the way that I am. That's
I
what Pan
work
said.
effort.
That was
So
what I said.
obviously it's not true.
But it is what I said.
that-
I said work effort. No one uses the word work effort. There's a difference between.
I
work
haven't
the
been saying work
complaint-
for effort. Like,
The
I don't know
complaint
why
we're
you-
making isn't that no one uses it. It's just that generally speaking, the way you're conflating it is the part of the problem. And when people do it, like in this instance, that's part of the problem. We're not saying
Okay,
no
you're
one
saying
does it.
conflating, but what I'm conflating here is the way that this term is commonly understood and used, right? So if you're saying, hey, we need to separate these two things,
Do
and
you
we
think
should
if we're-
strip away somebody's productivity and their efficiency in the workplace from their honesty, their integrity, their ability to work on the team, their professionalism. We should have a dividing line between these two things, right? Then hey, maybe we can have that discussion. But I'm not conflating anything here when I say that work ethic in the way that it's commonly understood, the way that I use the word, right, this term, it includes these things.
If I am arguing a critique of a social commentary that I think exists and is worth addressing, I think it's fair to say that it would be a fair argument for you to make that we should separate the things that that we're talking about, these two subjects, that is in the vernacular of a certain subset of people. Like I'm making a social critique. Of course there are people out there that engage in this conflation, but just for me to separate these issues that you're conflating does not
make that
contradict
clear.
my argument.
Right? It's not conflation. This is the way
no,
the word is commonly used. What you're saying instead is that, hey, rather than including integrity and honesty in the definition of work ethic, we should just have productivity and the ability to work the job and show up on time and all these things. Right? So if that's what you're saying, we can talk about that. But don't say I'm not using work ethic correctly.
You really think that my entire like, I don't know if you didn't hear me, but I've been saying multiple times throughout this entire debate that my problem with your position and the way that you and other people talk about these things is that you are combining these two things. So if you just say lots of people combine them, yeah, I know. That's my issue. And if you're gonna tell me I should make that clear, I don't know if you weren't listening, but I've been saying it over and over again throughout this entire debate.
He has been. He's literally been saying this the entire time, and I'm not sure why you haven't understood that he did this separation, but he said it a whole bunch. And so like maybe we're just talking past each other. I'm not really sure why entirely, but Meat has been separate. Like he's literally done this hand gesture a ton of times.
Yeah, that's true for me. But I think the issue is that I've been conflating Meat's position with your position, and I think with Pan's position a bit, or maybe Wick's position, right? Because I think some of you were saying that I was using the word incorrectly. I think, Erudite, you did say that nobody else uses it in this way, and obviously that's not true, right? This is from the first page of Google. I didn't need to dig very far. This is the way, when I think of work ethic, all these things are in that box. And I think all these things are in the box because they're indications, not just that this person is a quality employee, but to me, it tells me a lot of somebody about this person as a human being, right? It doesn't tell me about whether or not they're a good mother, right? It doesn't tell me about whether or not they're gonna always stop at the stop sign, but it tells me other things about them that I think are useful.
What do you think it tells you about them outside of their like actual like moral character within specifically a workplace? Because that's a very specific space. Like what else does it tell you about a person other than they're good at being in a workspace?
It tells you they're willing to go the extra mile. Tells you that they're willing to
in the workspace. You're rewarded for that. You get money for going for the extra mile. That doesn't mean you're going to be willing to go for the extra mile.
You don't think that
it's inherently selfish?
You don't think that somebody's willingness to go the extra mile and to show up on time and to not make excuses and to work harder if that's what it takes to get the job done, and to be honest and to work well on the team and to all these, you don't think any of that tells you can be like indicative of the way that they behave outside of the workplace?
I don't know. I think Hitler had a great work ethic, but I don't really think that he's a super great person.
Did you almost say Wick Hitler? But anyway.
Yeah, I said Hitler had a great work ethic. He put in the hours. He worked super hard. He was really efficient. He worked well. People liked him in his thing. He went to prison and he still got elected. I mean, Hitler had a fucking bombastic work ethic.
Because
he was also
would you say that
genocidal piece of shit.
Would you say
Hitler
that
didn't work well on the
bad,
team, did he?
Oh, it's not.
He had to. He was elected. He inherently had to work well with the team. How else did he get to the position, get out of prison, and then get
He was elected by bullying people into like submission. Like this guy, like he was not a team player. He wasn't an honest person. He didn't have any integrity. Like I would not say Hitler had good work ethic.
He just wasn't on the same team as
so
everyone
it's
else.
actually the case.
They had their own little
don't
team there.
reinforce work ethic. What they instead reinforce is something different, and work ethic is not reinforced in our workplace at all because bad people seem to rise to the top pretty consistently. So like, what are we saying now? Just work ethic is moral character.
If the reason that Hitler
my question would be,
don't reward moral character.
Yeah, if the reason that what Hitler worked and
lack
achieved
of a
was
work
bad,
ethic.
if the reason that what Hitler worked to achieve was bad is something different than work ethic, that's exactly the point. What would you call something? What would you call the values that we ascribe to an individual outside of what they can contribute to a company? That was such a great question because that's the underlying question. That's what we call like moral judgments. That's the thing I'm trying to ambiguate. And when you combine them, when you equate honesty to some degree with what I would consider a good and more useful definition of work ethic, then you start to run into these exact problems that we're talking about, where like all of a sudden, I guess that's a good heuristic to use to say that Hitler is a good person, right? None of us say that.
So I'm going to give Wick the opportunity to respond. I want to hear what he has to say, but I do want to move us past this point because we're very much stuck here. But Wick, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to try. PrimeCayes. So regardless of how we use it, whether we use Doobie's definition, whether you use Erudite or Meat or Pans, whoever's definition they use. I guess my question to Doobie is, do you feel that this, whatever definition you want to use for it, that this is societally enforced, that there's a lot of societal pressure for workers in a workplace to conform to whatever standard of work ethic happens to be in the workplace? Do you think that's a true thing?
Yeah,
right?
of course, and I think it's a good
Okay.
thing.
You think it's good. Do you not acknowledge, though, that there are negative connotations and negative consequences to that? Do you think it is entirely good, or do you think that there are negative things that can happen?
Yeah, I don't think it's entirely good.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
there
what
are
are
probably
some,
some
to
bad
you, what are some of the
consequences. Yeah.
negative things that can happen? Just so I know.
Like Meat brought up earlier, right? So if you have a predatory employer that's willing to take advantage of somebody's good work ethic, right, a willingness to do the job for whatever reason, then yeah, they could hurt people. They could have somebody working, 50-hour weeks, 60-hour weeks, for very little pay, with no benefits, all these things, right, in terrible working conditions. And because there is a focus on the work ethic, right, there might be this social pressure within the workplace to just slug through it and grind away because that's what you do. Right? Absolutely.
Given that that's the case, I think I like to try to solve problems if we can, or at least try to think through. So what are some solutions to this? Do you think that we should at least pull back a little bit on some of the negative connotations here? I should say, should we pull back on the emphasis we place on this within our society?
No,
Even
I
just a
don't think
little?
I don't think it's worth pointing to the edge case and be like, oh God, here this predatory employer is taking advantage of people's good work ethic and good intentions. No, you deal with the predatory employers, right? You regulate those people. I don't think there's any reason to devalue the idea of a good work ethic.
No, I don't think it devalues it at all. My contention here is that what you see as an edge case, I see as commonplace. And it has been my experience, admittedly anecdotal, that this happens across the spectrum from private corporations to service sector to government industries, that in every situation where I've worked with other people, that there's been this pressure there to conform to it. And it hasn't been all bad. I'm not saying that work ethic is necessarily bad in and of itself. What I am saying, and I think the major problem I have with it, is the way we will devalue and dehumanize those we do not feel are conforming to whatever our version happens to be of a work ethic. And I feel that's harmful. I feel it's causing a lot of issues, interpersonal and family and health issues in people as they're pushed societally to perform. And it's hurting
I think
us
it should cause family
overall.
issues. If you have a family and you're not working hard to pay the bills or whatever to provide for that family, there should be consequences within the family unit. Like, why shouldn't there be?
But
Yeah,
wouldn't
it
it be
don't-
nice if there were less?
Wait,
No.
He's saying something different. He's
Why
saying,
not?
well, I mean, I guess, well, he said, I guess you're saying it to be within the context of our society, because the only way that it wouldn't have consequences is if, like, we had like a UBI
like
or
utopia.
something. Yeah, right. Yeah, we've already achieved utopia. Then you
Or-
wouldn't have those. But until we
Right.
achieve something like that, then a person who is not taking care of their family, not going that extra effort, yeah, your family is going to suffer.
No, absolutely. But in the meantime, so this is why, like, I just want to say, like, I'm not necessarily arguing for a UBI, at least not right now in our current time, like at the current point in history. But what I am saying is that the fact that we're even having conversations about UBI at this point in time is a reflection of the underpinnings of the values that we have in our society. And the fact is that although we can't necessarily institute UBI, we could maybe lighten the load a little bit without taking it entirely off the population in a way that could benefit us. And the fact is like, if we can do it practically, it seems to me, of course, if we could get away with it in our society, if we can afford it, etc., that doesn't start to break the system or hurt us, of course we would love to take those burdens off of families. Of course we would like to get better outcomes in the home.
Wait, but we
Of course
can't
would like
do
to
that
get
right
slow
now.
up.
But we do.
We-
so
but we
the
can't
go to work
afford it.
week is
So
decreasing
hold
in
on,
length.
hold on.
It-
So I'm gonna try this because when it comes, we have been stuck on this moral idea, right? So but it's like it's an important one, right? So I want to say it's an important point, and it's something I talked to Erudite about previously about the this Protestant work ethic. I know you're very passionate about this, but if we created Doobie's version, as Doobie has defined it, right? If we create a new term for what Doobie is describing, let's call it, I don't know, work virtue. It's the only thing that popped in my
Moral
mind.
person. I would say that's like a moral person. Like everything that's listed, like integrity, honesty, like all these things. I'm like, that broadly categorizes anyone that I'd say is pretty moral.
But you can be moral, but like just not performing well your job because you also lack dedication. You also lack commitment to like the tasks that you're given, right? And maybe you
Right.
can
And we probably wouldn't say those
display
people are
good work
good at work
virtue.
ethic, right?
Yeah,
Like
but
if they're moral but kind of bad at their work, we'd probably say that they don't have a great, like say they're a really nice person, but they're terrible for reliability. Like they're late all the time and stuff like that. But they're the best friend you'll ever have. They're really good and they live by their morals, but man, they've got an issue with like conscientiousness and like forgetfulness. And so their workplace fucking hates them because they would view them as having terrible work ethic, but they're
yeah.
still a moral person, which is why I don't like that with work ethic. We include things like integrity and honesty because they're moral words.
Well, hold on. Okay, so what Doobie would be, he would be agreeing with you that that person that you described doesn't have. And again, we're creating a new term. I'm just using work virtue for now. Work virtue, right? They don't have that. But it's not as if it's some sort of judgment call on the rest of their life, right? It's not as if it says anything about their home life, about how they treat their friends or anything. Just that within the context of this work environment, they can employ these, they can display these traits, right? I hope I'm not butchering your point, Doobie. I really apologize if I do. I am. But so I'm saying that like if we like package this idea that Doobie's been presenting, right? Which is different. It's not saying that working hard makes you a good person. It's that some of the traits that also we commonly call being a good person just happen to mean that you're also a great worker. So if we package that idea, right, and use that in society instead of this Protestant work ethic, which you very well defined, like could we leave the rest of the infrastructure of this workaholic culture, right? And could we have good outcomes? So meaning that if we had work virtue as what people were aiming for, right? Is it necessarily tied with all the negative outcomes that Wick was talking about in terms of like being socially pressured? Is that tied inherently with this idea of working hard? Is that like you're going to have points in time where your coworkers say, well, you aren't displaying work virtue, right? The way I'm displaying work virtue. And so we are going to either socially pressure you, make this, make your work life terrible, right? Because of that. Are these two things tied? Do we necessarily have to get rid of one so that the other can flourish?
Well,
I don't know if I fully agree with Wick's prescription of how specifically the like social pressure plays out precisely. The issue that I see is typically workplaces. I think we'd all agree that workplaces say, like, we want to reward work ethic, right? Being a good worker, which is fair. We've all agreed that that would also be a fair thing for business to do. They're going to want to reward their best workers. But if we say so, and then a lot of businesses, I think of businesses LARP, like all of the things that Doobie sent me are typically from business insiders and business companies. And I think businesses like to LARP about what they think work ethic and a good worker is. But the reality is, what gets rewarded in a workplace is efficiency, dedication to the specific work, and broadly conscientiousness. I think that would probably capture like all of the other things that would contribute the most. Probably being high IQ helps you as well, right? Because it's going to contribute to the efficiency specifically. So this is typically the people who get promoted. This is the people who get more money. And these are oftentimes the people held up by the bosses and being like, look at this great worker. And then you might be like, well, Ryan's a piece of shit. Right? We all know that. This is why there's this weird thing where CEOs seem to score really weirdly high on the psychopathy scale. So if we're saying that our system values work ethics, which everyone would say that our system seems to do, and that our hierarchy reinforces work ethic, it's hard to say that honesty, integrity, and moral character is actually connected to work ethic, because the people in this system who rise to the top are sometimes some of the shittiest people in the system, like the CEOs with the really high psychopathy rate, like Hitler, like fucking most politicians. Sometimes the shittiest people.
Are the best moral actors in our society, right?
And the issue is that we pressure people absolutely by saying, well, work ethic isn't just your efficiency and all these things. It's also how much integrity you have. But it's like, we've all worked in workplaces. And I'm like, my manager didn't have integrity when they made up false accusations about me and my team. That didn't seem like integrity at all. And yet she's now promoted to the Canadian Board of Psychology. That's super weird. That doesn't seem like anything connected to the work ethic that you say that we're supposed to do. So I think we LARP and we say that work ethic is all of these extra moral characters. And in an ideal world, yeah, I would think a more moral person would be a better worker. But the reality is that our system doesn't reinforce that, which means inherently we have norms that say work ethic is fundamentally what our workplaces reinforce, which isn't actually the most moral behavior. It's amoral. Efficiency and stuff like that, I'm fine with it, but it is not moral and it doesn't make you a good person.
I mean,
there's a lot of
would be a contributing factor, though, right? Like, you're describing someone who does a lot of work, right, but is immoral on the side. That there's, you can say that person has a higher, I guess, work ethic, but it's despite the fact that they're immoral, not because of it, right?
So most CEOs just happen to have a work ethic despite all of it. But our system still values work ethic, and all of these morals are connected to work ethic, and our system values those things.
No, I would say that other traits in work ethic, like efficiency, competence, stuff like that, I would say would be enough to outweigh the moral impact when it comes to this thing.
Because work ethic has nothing to do with your integrity or honesty or moral character. That is why these things are separate.
True,
absolutely it is. That is how we descriptively engage with the term as a society, right? So I believe you that people use the word in other ways. I'm telling you that they're fucking wrong and part of the problem.
Because there's a difference between a virtue. Virtue is a great word to separate these things, right? Because we can use it pretty consistently. Virtues and morals, these are different types of statements. Like work ethic, in a certain sense, like some people would say beauty is a virtue. The reason like we describe virtues in these ways, even though I'm not necessarily willing down the hill of beauty being a virtue, is virtues are things, cleanliness. These are things that are useful, right? They're good to have, but not necessarily bad not to have. And that's a pretty good separation of what is like a moral statement, of a moral statement versus a virtuous statement, right? And it's important to separate those things because we want to be able to benefit from those separation of things. We want to be able to engage and encourage virtues without necessarily stigmatizing not being the most virtuous person. A virtuous person or someone who has certain virtues or useful traits is different from someone who is contributing to society, because this is where my underlying contention is when we talk about someone contributing to society, there are all sorts of moral ways that someone contributes to society. And generally speaking, I would say how we generally judge people, the moral ways in which someone contributes to society are more meaningful, at least to me, by and large, than the ways in which someone productively, or if this case, if we're stretching the word a little bit, virtuistically, like or along an axis of virtues, contribute to society.
Your cam is frozen, but we've been trying to get in here.
It's a good place to be frozen at. I guess one of the other issues, like again, this is a really good way of tackling it. One of the problems when we tie these things together, one of the other issues is we all see how people treat those they can view as immoral. Like as soon as we label someone as immoral or as a bad actor, as someone who doesn't have virtue, as you say, it becomes okay for certain segments to do a lot of shitty things to them and treat them in very shitty ways. And so when we tie this idea that if you aren't a good worker bee, and have good quote-unquote work ethic, then you must not be a good person. That means people will treat you pretty shittily, at least as I've observed.
I mean, maybe, but for individuals with incomplete information, it is a decent heuristic, right? Like, if I'm not going to know someone's life story, right? But if I know that someone never shows up to work on time, I know that someone shirks their responsibilities and makes other employees compensate for that, I have a idea about what type of person that would be. Now, it's not a perfect idea, right? Like, it could be the case that if I had all the information, this person would be like one of the people I think are the best people in life. However, as people with incomplete information, I don't think it's wrong for us to use that as a heuristic, since we all seem to agree that
That's what we're
It
saying.
is,
It is
yeah.
wrong. It's
Why?
just like any other
Because
stereotypical assessment that you make of people. You might be like, well, it seems to be the case in my growing up that typically when I'm exposed to people that do this, or this is where all stereotypes come from. This heuristics are inherently, when they're stereotyping entire groups of individuals based on a couple of behaviors, the exact thing that you listed out was exactly my situation when I was working for the government as a landscaper. I got debilitating IBS and I couldn't fucking function. And absolutely, my employer and my coworkers treated me like I was a bad person. I was working with my best friend and it was actually kind of straining for us. And she was doing her best to be compassionate. But the level of later, like, yeah, but you're a really bad worker. Because I was a terrible worker because I was sick. I was like so sick, like 4 to 5 days out of a week. I could barely even crouch. I was so ill. Like that's how bad my gut was. And I absolutely got treated like a bad person. And I wasn't. I was sick. And this happens to people all the time. This happens to people with disabilities, chronic invisible illness, chronic pain. People who have ADHD, people who have autism. Absolutely. Talk to an ADHD person about working in the workplace. They're usually have bad work ethics because they're forgetful as fuck. They're not very conscientious and they're never on fucking time. And their keys are everywhere. Like their keys are never with them and they're everywhere else. And every employer would say that they have bad work ethic. And they would judge them as a bad person. And this is how stigma happens in our society. And it's fucked up and it's wrong because work ethic is about your efficiency and proficiency in your workplace, which is fucking cool. If you're a good worker, I like that. I respect you. But it doesn't mean you're a bad person if you don't have it. That's the key, is the lack of work ethic does not indicate anything inherently about your character.
We use these.
It
yeah,
does
we use these
indicate.
Hold
though.
on,
It does indicate. It just doesn't necessitate.
It
right?
shouldn't.
No.
It
there
shouldn't. And if you engage in
it
that,
always does indicate.
if you're engaging in that heuristic, that makes you just as shitty as people who are like, well, broadly, most crime is done by men. So that means most men are kind of bad. And it's like, no, this is a bad baseline heuristic. You're engaging in Bayesian fallacy and you shouldn't do it. And I'm going to tell people that when you assume bad things about somebody's character based on their work ethic alone, you're being kind of shitty.
But you can
Wait,
do
hold
that
on.
about
There-
any
so-
negative thing that
that
people do in
And
society.
shitty.
So that's the problem.
Like you could say that. Oh,
So
well, I
hold on.
don't
I
hang around
want to hear
people
from
who cheat because I think
Pan,
cheating is
Doobie,
bad.
then Wick. So Pan, Doobie. Wick,
Yeah,
go
well,
ahead.
there's a bunch of negative things in society that people form stereotypes about. Like, let's say someone cheats on their spouse a lot. I would assume that, hey, people who cheat on their spouse, they do this bad things. Now, that's a stereotype. I am taking an entire group of people and taking that to indicate. Now, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person inherently, but with the information that I have at that time, it does give me some indication about it. Now, it might not be perfect, and it might be wrong to necessitate, like, say, nothing can change my opinion. If I see someone who's cheated on a spouse, no amount of new information can make me think they're a good person. Now, I would say that that's a bad attitude to have. However, I don't think it's a bad attitude to have to say, okay, well, this person might not be a good person because I've seen them cheat on people, but I'm open to new information. But until then, I'm going to use the information I have because that's all you can do. So I would say that there's any bad behavior in society that you want to condemn as morally bad is going to have the same exact problem, where if you say, okay, well, that bad moral action indicates someone who might not be, necessarily good, that's going to be a stereotype.
That's the
basically
issue.
saying
Somebody
don't-
who's
don't
bad at
cancel
a
them.
workplace isn't inherently bad, right? Somebody who lies and cheats on their partner is very different than somebody who maybe sucks at gardening or has ADHD. There is a difference in that, like, cheating is to some extent a binary, whereas work ethic is a thing that's somewhat subjectively determined in large part by what makes you efficient and productive in that specific workplace.
Okay, that I disagree with you. I disagree with these two things are necessarily different. And Doobie, I'm going to go to you, and then Wick, and me as well. But I highly disagree with you. That necessarily, like, there could be all kinds of reasons why a person cheats, right? Like,
Yeah,
there
but a
could be-
cheater isn't a group of people. Like, it's not
Yes,
a
it
group.
is.
Yeah,
What do you
it
mean?
is. It's a group.
Hold on.
A
Can we?
group of people
Here's
who
the thing,
cheated
though.
on their partner, right?
Why are
Like,
we,
we
why
can-
are
we
we
can
saying
hold on.
being late to work and cheating are the same thing?
They're not the
Do
same
we really
thing. They're
think?
just
They're both
things that are
immoral actions.
undesirable.
There's a huge difference.
They're not
There's a
comparable.
huge difference. At the very least, I'm sure we can agree that there's a huge difference between the kind
Somebody who
of
did something wrong and somebody who just doesn't do something. Fuck!
Well, there's
That's
also
why
a
we say
huge degree of,
criminals
like-
are morally bad, but people who, like, don't give to charity aren't inherently
or at the
morally
very
bad.
least, or at the very least, we attribute more charitability.
Hold on,
to
but this is
ascribing
like
something
assuming
There's a
that
moral
difference.
to a
cheating
Hold
is
on.
like immoral.
there's a
Right?
difference.
So like Prem
You're
said,
in a
maybe
relationship
maybe
and
their
you've
husband beats
defined the
them or
limits of
something, right?
what your
Like maybe
relationship looks like. Everyone would agree that cheating is immoral within
no,
that.
not
If
true.
you,
Not
yes,
true.
yes,
Dishonest.
absolutely.
No, I don't think
hold
so.
on,
Cheating
but
is not
Erudite-
an objective thing, but cheating on your partner, if you understand what cheating means to your partner and you do those things, everyone would treat you like a shitty person
Erudite,
because it's
No,
immoral.
I don't think that's true.
That's just a
Erudite.
different
Hold on,
scale, though. It's all
hold on. No. Erudite. Because within the context of a working relationship between me and my employer, right? They expect certain things of me. If I don't do those certain things, then that is also bad, right? Like they're going to fulfill their end of the bargain by providing me with money, right, and insurance, here in the States or whatever, right? A safe working environment. They're going to do that, and then I have to fulfill my part of the bargain by getting the tasks done that I need to get done, right? Like so. It's not that that person is a bad person. I agree with you. That's not a bad person if they don't do those tasks necessarily. But still, they are breaking that contract, that social contract, or actual contract here. And then in terms of relationship, the same thing. There are expectations, and then whether you meet them or not does not necessarily mean that you're a bad person. But
this is a
you
false
have
equivocation.
failed here,
No,
right?
it's not.
This is
It's
a false
just that
equivocation
different
because
scale. It's the
it's
same
a false
thing.
equivocation because we do not ascribe the same moral weight and responsibilities to your contract with your employer as we do to your contract with your loved one.
I
That's
know
not
that.
an equivocation. No one here is disagreeing. Obviously, cheating is worse than not doing your job at work. However, both, although they're not the same in scale, they are both things that are, negatives to have, right? So one group of negative behaviors, and there's one group of negative behaviors, cheating, which is really bad. We all agree it's horrible. People don't do this. There's one other group of behaviors, not being great at your job. That's kind of bad. It's not great. It's not the end of the world, but it's
not bad in the same way at all.
Yeah,
it's not bad
I
in
didn't
the
say the
same way
same
at all.
way. Just
Being
a
bad
little
at your
bit,
job.
right?
This is you literally just did it right now. If we're talking about bad, if we're
not a
defining
negative
bad in the
behavior.
way. If you're
Yes,
defining
being bad
bad
at your
as
job is a
bad in
negative
the way that
behavior.
it's
No,
bad
what
to
if you're
place your
stupid
contract
and
with
you suck at your job? Or what if you're not very charismatic, so you're a terrible waitress, right?
No.
The
That's
things
different.
that contribute to you becoming a cheater are very different etiologies than the thing that might predict if you're a bad worker, in large parts because what makes you a bad worker is so much more subjective, and workplaces differ. Like I don't know what to do
why
with
you-
this.
What if you?
That's
What
why
if
you
you?
can't
Hold on,
be
hold
bad
on,
in the
what if you're a
same
bad
way.
worker because your boss is abusive? What if you cheated because your spouse is abusive? Like you can arrive at we can create very similar scenarios, right? Where you're breaking the contract in each individual case. So like I don't think these things are that far different. I'm just not applying necessarily a moral prescription to these things. I'm just saying that.
Sure.
That these two things are bad. They're a contract, and that you can break that contract. You can break it for all kinds of reasons, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're bad. Oh, Doobie.
Yeah, I think. Okay, so back to the cheating thing really quickly. So, as Pan said earlier, right? So, somebody's a cheater, right? It might indicate to you, or you might assume that they're a bad person because cheating is generally a bad thing to do, right? But if you're open to new information, right? So, i.e., their husband's beating the shit out of them, ignores them, treats them like garbage, is cheating with other people, and you've taken all that information. I think you treat their cheating as less like morally wrong, right? You'd be more understanding of it, right? And in the same way, right? Somebody having like being a bad worker, whether it's because they have like a physical illness or a mental illness or whatever, and you not expressing that to you, so you don't know that they have this thing, but they're a bad worker. They're dropping the ball all the time. They're not showing up on time, forcing everybody else to pick up the slack and work harder to make up for them, and just being a drag on the workplace, right? So this is going to indicate to me that this person is not doing the thing that they agreed to do when they took this job, right? And because of that, everybody else is suffering, right? And when I find out this person has like a mental issue or a physical issue, then hey, that's new information I can take in. I'm like, oh shit, hey, they're not actually a bad worker. They're just suffering with a thing, and I need to help accommodate them.
So,
Right? So
the
like
issue is that
these are like, go ahead.
No, finish it. I want you to finish. I thought you were done.
Yeah. So again, it's like Pan said. It's an indication of a thing, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily that thing, right? You're taking new information about this person, about what's going on in their home life or whatever, that's leading them to showing up on time. Maybe they're showing up late because their mother's sick or something, right? Or whatever it is, or they're having car trouble, whatever it is, right? These are all things you can work out, right? But if somebody doesn't have these issues and they just don't want to do the fucking work, which is usually the case, right? They don't want to get up on time. They're staying up too late playing video games. They don't really give a fuck about the job that they agreed to do for me, right? So in these cases, right, I'm okay with saying, hey, I'm going to think less of you as a person for wasting my time by showing we're going to do this job and showing up and doing it poorly because you just don't give a fuck about it.
So this is disanalogous. So cheating would be better compared to stealing from work because it's a breach of explicit contract of what you're not supposed to be doing in the relationship. Being a bad worker, being crappy at your job, being lazy, being shitty is underperforming in what you offered to do, which would be like being kind of a bad boyfriend, like a neglectful boyfriend, which we'd say is like still not great, but it's very, very different. And we wouldn't say like somebody who's kind of like a crappy boyfriend. We wouldn't moralize that person. We'd be like, well, shit happens, right? Like maybe they like had a broken family. Yes, absolutely. The way that we moralize a cheater or somebody who steals from work or lies on their hour sheet is very different than how we should be attributing somebody who like just like lets somebody down in a relationship, isn't as emotionally available as they need to, misses a couple of birthday parties that they agreed to. It's very different than cheating on your partner.
I agree. It's definitely not the same scale, but we definitely do stigmatize being a bad boyfriend, right? You don't want someone to be a bad boyfriend, and as a group, people talk about it a lot. How many times have you heard someone complain about their ex? It's not always going to be cheating, and there is something, you shouldn't
No,
be
it's
a bad
not a scale.
boyfriend.
This
You
is
should try to be a good
disanalogous.
boyfriend.
There's two separate
Okay,
things
no,
happening
we
here.
don't need to use cheating. I'm not like married.
Sure, we can abandon
If we-
cheating,
if-
but just
No,
to be
not
clear,
married
cheating.
cheaters.
It's not
Is-
married to it's not cheating, so it's all good.
Well, you never know. Some of us might be. I guess I think I'm. Doobie, are you married? Am I the only one married? Oh, what do I?
No,
I would marry the rest of
girlfriend,
us.
but I'm not married. Yeah.
Okay. The issue is that this isn't an argument of extent. It is disanalogous. Cheating is not like being a bad worker. Cheating is like stealing from work. So it's not extent. It is disanalogous. So if we want to use a different thing, like being a bad boyfriend compared to not being a good worker, I'm much more comfortable with that. And then we can talk about the social stigma applied.
Okay, well
I
then
agree.
let's do that, because I think that we can judge people for being a bad boyfriend if we don't have more information. Now it could turn out that there's stuff in their home life that's going wrong with them, like Doobie said, and with that new information, I would reevaluate whether or not I think it's a bad person. But if all I know is someone's a bad boyfriend, they don't remember anniversaries, they never show up to dates on time, they don't really care about what the other person's doing, they're emotionally distant, all this stuff, I would judge them for that without having more information.
Look,
right?
I
See, you're
honestly,
doing it-
That's
you're
a
doing
shit
it
heuristic
right
to
now.
have.
Yeah, that's
I
really
don't know
judgmental.
about you.
like, look,
I mean,
So-
it's the best you can do sometimes.
No, it's
No,
not.
no,
You can
it's
actually
not.
be a better
You need
person and be
information.
like,
No.
wow, he wasn't
Okay.
my boyfriend. What do I
No,
really know? I've probably
I
only
think-
heard one
I think
side.
That's
Like,
just uncertainty,
anyone-
though, right?
Anyone can do like 2 seconds of extra mental application and not stigmatize the bad boyfriend. Like to act
Yeah,
like
let
being
me
like,
give
this
you
is
an
just what
example.
humans do. It's
No,
a shitty
give me a
heuristic, and I'm
second.
saying stop doing this with bad workers.
I'll give you
Give
one
me-
example.
give me a
It's like
second
a
here.
heuristic that works
Let me-
sometimes.
let me-
I could be
let me-
What if I was
let me get
forgetful?
in on this. Let me
can I
just
just
push
say-
It's Wick's
back.
turn. It's Wick's turn.
Yeah. Well, let me
Can I go
push
now?
back against this because no, I think we judge entirely too much in our culture. I think we use too little information to come to too big of conclusions all the time. This happens all the time in meat space and in online space as well. And I think I think we should, as a culture, normalize withholding judgment till we have more complete data sets. We use these shortcuts like you're talking about. This happened just here recently where we conflate things just naturally, like, oh, this person hurt me because he cut me off on the street. He must just be like Hitler and things like that. And we make these leaps in our head. I'm being a little facetious there, but we do make these leaps. We make these broad assumptions and character assumptions off of very, very insignificant data points that we use incorrectly to draw and extrapolate to wide variety of moral stigmas on them. And it's hurting us, and it's hurt us in the past. It's hurting
I
us
think
in the
the
future.
difference here is that you're citing people who are becoming too certain with incomplete information. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a low degree of certainty that someone's like, if someone's a horrible driver, always cuts people off. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, okay, there's a 5% chance that, like, I'm just making up numbers. There's a 5% chance this guy's just a complete asshole, but 95% chance the guy's good. Now, obviously, you're not going to go around like defaming him, saying, "Oh my God, this guy's bad in traffic, so I hate him."
But
you are
people
still
do that, right?
Okay,
You say
but
this,
hold up.
Do this.
But
People do this all the
Yes,
time.
I'm-
Oh, he showed up too late from work. Oh, he must be a bad person.
In
Like
fact-
they do this, right?
In
Yeah,
fact,
they-
okay,
no,
but
if
I'm
you
not
ask-
hold on,
saying
but
you
that-
should
that-
do that,
that
though.
typically
I'm
doesn't
saying
happen.
that in your head, it's okay to say, like, man, this was a bad behavior. Now I'm more likely to think that they're, less of a good person. I don't think there's anything wrong
that's
with
the thing.
adjusting
Here's the thing.
adjusting your beliefs about someone else based on their behaviors. I don't think that's wrong. Now, I don't think you should do it like, oh, you have 100% certainty that this person is the most evil person to ever exist because they cut me off in traffic. I do think that it's okay to say, like, your evaluation of the other person goes a little bit down and you have a little bit less of an opinion on them.
Listen, I agree with you that like having a disproportionate level of certainty about making determinations about other people that is unfair is like the problem. But my point is that when you say things like, for example, if I'm going to use the new example, being a bad boyfriend or something like that, it says something bad about you. That no, sometimes people do stigmatize it in a way that is problematic. I would say generally we shouldn't stigmatize it because just for an example, this is the problem. That's consistent with your position, but that's why your position is bad in this case. Because as a heuristic, just as an example, I have been a bad boyfriend due to having ADHD, due to being forgetful, due to maybe, I don't know, being like socially an idiot and not being able to be engaged in certain ways that might be more beneficial to my girlfriend, right? That doesn't make me a bad person. That doesn't mean that you should like stigmatize me for that.
No, but
like,
if that's all some other girl had seen, if that's all some other girl had seen, you would understand why they might be less likely to, decide to start dating you, right? Like, is there anything wrong with a girl saying, hey, this guy was rude to all of his exes, I'm not going to date him? Right? They're using a heuristic. They're judging you not as an entire person. They're using only the information that they have. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's true that
you can do both. You can allow women. It can be okay for women to want to date certain kinds of men without stigmatizing them for not being the kind of man that they want. These are separate things.
Women are
The
doing,
extent
right?
of your argument is basically saying that stereotypical and like bigoted thinking is like kind of okay because it's like human.
Wait,
Like
but
this is. Oh my God.
It's absolutely that's because again, that's all the information you have about people. Sometimes you can be open to new information. You always should be open to new information. But when all you know about somebody is that they're cheating on their wife a bunch, or they've beaten their girlfriend, or whatever it is, right? Then hey, I think you're okay
Beating
with
your
making
girlfriend
some more.
isn't equivalent here.
Okay. Wait, hold on.
Again,
Wait, hold on. It actually, I think it. Please stop.
Dibby.
Stop. Okay, because maybe they had a good reason to beat their girlfriend. Maybe the girlfriend came at them with a knife and he punched her in the face, and now she's going around saying that he beat her. Right. So like you don't know because you don't know more about that situation, right? As you just did, you said, oh well, beating your girlfriend is on a different level. So that tells me that you're assuming there that when somebody says that they've beaten their girlfriend, that if you know somebody's beating their girlfriend, it's always a bad thing, right? You're willing to make that assumption, right? But I just gave it in a situation where they might have needed to beat the fuck out of the girlfriend. This girlfriend's been crazy, right? So that you could always find new information that contextualizes this thing that you have. But I think it's okay to make assumptions, to make judgments with the information you have, and to be willing to build on it further as new information comes up. I don't think everybody owes you their time. I don't think the guy being an asshole in traffic, and cutting people off constantly, and speeding and putting everybody else in danger around him, is owed your extra time to say, oh well, hey, maybe he just had a really bad day today. Maybe, oh god, maybe he dropped coffee on his dick. I don't think you owe people this.
Cool.
And
So you guys think that it's
worker,
okay to assume that a black
somebody
person's going to be more violent because, like, population percentage-wise, black people.
We can get into that again if you'd like. I'm
This
totally
is the
willing to get
problem with
into
this heuristic, is that it inherently has to go here. That if you can
That's
justify
fine.
it based on like no,
No,
this is a
here's the thing.
problem.
It is.
No.
It is fine.
Keep saying all
Just
we
as
got is all
hold
we
on.
got.
Just
Sometimes
as
it's
we'd make
okay
the
to
same
be
assumptions
rude.
about a man
Sometimes it's
versus a woman. That a man is going to be more violent on average than a woman is. We're okay with making those assumptions.
No,
Right? So I don't
necessarily.
understand
I
why
have
we
a
wouldn't make
problem
others.
I have a problem.
Please.
when people-
Pan, are you
I'm
also
so
willing to
small.
bite this bullet? Are you also willing to say that it is okay to assume that a black person is more violent based on heuristics?
No, but for different reasons. I think that I don't think that's a good enough indicator for you to make a decision out of. Like, because if you're looking at a black person, the odds that they're going to be violent is like 0.0001%. So if you treat them with any degree of certainty because of this stereotype, I think that's wrong. Now, if the odds were higher, let's say, now this obviously is not true, but let's say like every single black person you met was 50% likely to attack you. I think it would be okay to use that heuristic and avoid black people. The reason it's not okay is because black people are they're not
It's probably more predictive than being a bad boyfriend. Being a bad boyfriend has almost no indication on how you're going to like treat some random fuck on the street. That's
It
nothing
depends
to
how
do with
you've been a
whether
bad
you're like a
boyfriend.
good brother. Yes,
disagree. I
obviously,
think
but we're talking about specifically the type of bad boyfriend that's analogous with the situation of being a bad worker. Being a bad worker is probably less predictive of violence than everything else we've listed, or being any other sort of poor character. Like being a bad worker, immorality, it is probably not at all predictive.
I mean,
Yeah, you
yeah,
guys
it's not
keep
at all
saying-
predictive
you guys-
of stuff like violence.
So
yeah,
it's
but it is-
stupid.
Yeah, we're not
It's
talking
stupid.
about
It's a
violence.
Violence
Bayesian
isn't the
fallacy. It's a
bad
Bayesian
guys
fallacy.
keep
You're
saying
conflating work ethic with a whole bunch of moral characteristics
Okay,
that work ethic is unpredictive of. It's
True.
fucking
Okay,
stupid.
Fair enough. If
Really
someone
simply
is
put.
using work ethic, and what they're taking from work ethic is that, hey, this person has a bad work ethic. I bet they beat children. Yes, that is a bad way to use that heuristic. If you're using the heuristic to do something like, this person is always late for work, they're probably going to be late for the movie that we said we were going to go see. Something like that. That is not an improper way to use it. They could be wrong, right? Always you should take into account new information, but there's a difference. You can use these saying that you can't use this heuristic to determine whether or not someone's likely to be a serial killer doesn't mean anything, because I don't think most people are saying
Nobody said
this
that. You're
person was a
talking some
lazy
shit.
worker.
Nobody's saying.
I'm not
Nobody
saying
has said that. Nobody said that you're predicting a serial killer.
Okay,
You're
but
saying
predicting violence. I'm saying it predicts.
no.
some
You're
behaviors that are bad, but
specifically
not
what's being
others.
said is work ethic is probably decently indicative of other moral characteristics, and that's a fine heuristic to have. And I'm saying that it's dog shit. The extent of where it goes is the backbone of racism and other prejudice, and it's a bad thing to advocate for. And how does being late make you a bad person?
Like, very simply put, guys, like, here's the thing. You guys keep saying all we got, like, this is all we got. I don't think sometimes we have to do the best we can with information. Sometimes that's true, but the part that you're missing here is that sometimes it's better not to jump to conclusions about all the information.
No one is saying that you shouldn't do that.
No, you are.
No, I'm
you
not.
Are. You are
I'm not.
literally
If I think
advocating for
someone is a
jumping to
bad
conclusions when you don't have
driver,
enough
I'm not going to go around
Literally
and try to
doing
get them
right now.
fired from their employer, right? You need a certain amount of certainty.
I never
to
said you
engage in
were.
behavior,
I never
right?
said you were.
If my inner
What you are doing is ascribing moral
if
judgments
my
based upon
inner
these things.
view of
Yes,
their
you are.
character goes down because I see them always cutting in traffic, speeding, putting other people's life at risk, right? If I see that and I, don't do anything with that information, I just lower my opinion of them. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, if I say, okay, I'm going to figure out who this person is, dox them online, go do X,
No
Y,
one's
and Z
saying that
with
you're
them.
arguing against
No,
you
I
guys.
know.
No one's accusing you
Yes,
of that.
you
That's a false
just said to me.
equivocation.
You just told me that's what I was saying.
I just told you that you were saying you wanted to go fire people for.
No,
you not
you
like-
were saying
that's
that
not what
I
said.
was using.
What I said was
I'm saying that you
are
can use this to
using these
justify any
heuristics.
behavior.
No,
Okay, but
what I
Pan,
said was
you
using
have
these
to
heuristics
argue
value
within the
judgments.
landscape that we're talking about. Like what you're starting to talk about is things that are fully unrelated to what anything that we're talking about. Like this is like a full derail from what we're actually talking about at this point.
What you said, what you tried to use these heuristics to apply, to indicate, to infer value judgments to some extent from people. The contention is that it's a bad way to do heuristics because there's lots of times where you shouldn't come to determinations. If your
That just
justification,
means you shouldn't make.
hold on, just let me finish real quick. If your justification, because this was the justification that you and Doobie have offered, if your justification for these heuristics, using them in the way that you are, is to say that sometimes we have to do the best with the come to have the best conclusions based on the information we have, that is not a good argument in this case, because the whole other element of that you're forgetting, all I'm saying is that sometimes it's best not to come to conclusions when you don't have appropriate information. And this is one of those cases where, like, being a bad boyfriend is not a good way to make moral judgments about an individual. Like, it's a very, very weak indicator.
Okay, I have an example.
please
So
run-
when you see a video of a cop shooting a black person, right?
Oh gosh.
Okay, no, your initial response is going to be, you might think, hey, maybe I should wait for some more evidence. Maybe there's other stuff. You're probably going to have the gut reaction of
This is the
"Oh,
cheating.
This
This is
is
the
a shit-
cheating.
This
It's
is
still
not.
disanalogous.
This is,
No,
look,
I'm
just because
not.
I'm using more
I don't-
extreme examples doesn't make them
No.
disanalogous.
No. It is disanalogous because you're using the same principles to try to compare them, and we've already dismantled why these two things can't be compared. So you can make this analogy, and I'm going to say this is disanalogous, and I can walk you through again why you're
Fine, how
incorrect
about
about this analogy.
A video about someone being mean to a customer service person in public. Is that fine? Like a video of a Karen freaking out saying,
That would be
my manager, or the manager. Does that work? Is that not?
It's probably a bad idea to use that one video, that one piece of information, to jump to any conclusions. Let me finish. Other than that, in that specific instance, maybe they were a little much. And even that might be a stretch because we don't know any of the context before or after. What I am advocating for, what I am trying to get people to understand, is that we leap to conclusions much too easily, that we always have to have an opinion, and sometimes you just don't. Sometimes you could just withhold judgment and not make a decision, not make a judgment based on very, very small data sets, very, very small limited information. So let's please stop doing that about what we think.
Okay, but sometimes you need to make a judgment.
So you used a keyword
Sometimes
there,
you-
conclusion.
oh,
The keyword you used there was conclusion. You can make yes, I agree. We shouldn't come to conclusions about these type of things, but that is going to affect our I guess you could call them hypotheses about things, right? Like I saw this one video about a girl refusing to pay a welder. And I was like, wow, this is horrible, because she wasn't like wowed. And I was like, wow, this lady is a complete total Karen. And then pictures came out about the job the welder did, and it was absolutely horrible, and everything changed, right? So what I'm saying is you shouldn't come to conclusions about the original observation, but you should always be open to more information. However, it's not wrong to think a hypothesis. If someone says, I don't want to pay you, I just wasn't wowed by your job. It's okay to have the initial impression and wait for more information, and still have the initial impression.
Go ahead,
So
Dewey.
in the random
Dewey.
check-
Yeah,
okay.
let's get Dewey.
Yeah.
Okay, so Wick said that sometimes it's better to withhold judgment, but in a work environment, if you're the employer and if you're other employees, sometimes you need to make a judgment about this person you've either employed or who you're working with, right? To see because you need to know if you can depend on them to either do the job with you or to do the job at all, right? And typically, they're not like you don't just make the assumption right off the bat, right? What you'll do is, hey, if they're coming in late every day or they're not working, doing the work as quickly as they should, you talk to them and say, hey, I've noticed this and this and this. What's the issue? Like, what's going on? And if they have a good reason for the way they're behaving this way, maybe, like I said, maybe they're a sick mother, maybe they've been sick themselves, maybe they're having car issues. You can add that to the box of information you have about this person, right, when making this judgment about them. But if their thing is, oh well, hey, there's traffic, and every day they come in late, like, oh well, hey, sorry, traffic. Well, at some point, you'd expect a person who gives a fuck about the job, who gives a fuck about the strain that it puts on everybody else in the workplace when they show up late, to either get up a little earlier, right, or leave earlier, right, to avoid this traffic that they're running into every day, right? And if they don't do this, what it tells me is, hey, this person doesn't give a whole lot, doesn't give a whole lot of fucks about the strain that their unwillingness to either get up earlier or to take a different route or whatever it is to avoid this traffic that's making them late every day, doesn't care about the strain that puts on everybody else in the workplace, right? And I think it's okay to make an assumption about the person based on that, right? It's not as simple as, oh, they're showing up late, they must be a shit person. It's not that simple.
That's kind of how it plays out to some extent, right? Like, so when the rando video that you're talking about of like the woman, it's like kind of shitty, right? You had a moral judgment about her, but your moral judgment has zero impact on her. Unless you like reach out and you're like, fuck you, die, Karen, right? Which you didn't do, right? You just like had a thought and you're like, wow, she's a piece of shit. In your social milieu, when you get labeled as having bad work ethic, it has direct impacts on your life because the people in your social milieu will moralize it, because we all moralize, as you guys are doing right now, we moralize work ethic. They're going to make certain judgments about you and they're going to treat you worse as a result. And this absolutely has an impact. I can say personally, as somebody who's experienced this twice, it fucking wrecks you. It sucks. It's brutal. And even worse, if you fail your workplace and then you try to get into a new workplace, even if the work is totally unrelated, they get to talk to your ex who you were a bad boyfriend to, basically, which really fucking sucks, because absolutely a lot of employers would say they were a terrible worker, and the new employer, even if they're like, I'm a construction company and this was a lifeguarding job, they'll be like, they're probably kind of a shitty person, when it's like they might have just been terrible at construction because they had a really bad back.
Okay, but but if you have a bad back and you're seeking out construction work after failing at your last construction job, right? So you're getting into this new job. If you don't tell the person up front, hey, I've got a bad back, I'm not going to be able to do this job very well, then you're essentially lying to this person that is going to be paying you for your time, right? So I think it's totally reasonable. I think it's totally reasonable for the employer to go to your ex, right? And in your case, where you said you had IBS and so you were a terrible worker and all these things, right? I hope the employer reached out to you to ask you what was.
Do you want to know what happened in my specific case? Let me tell you
Sure.
precisely, because this happens all the time, and this happened not just to me, but to 6 other employees in the government. It was spread around that because I was a bad worker, the reason why I was sick and stuff all the time was because I was a drunk. I was a drunk, and I was coming in and doing alcohol and cocaine on the scene. And you might be like, oh, you're a one-off. This happened to 6 other employees at the same time, and then after I left that workplace, 5 more came out and said that the same thing happened. You could be like, well, that's an institute of like your shit job. Maybe, but this was a government job. So you would hope that it would have been a little bit better. And you want to know how that impacted my future job prospects? Well, now they have to call my boss, who thinks that I'm a drunk because I was late to work, even though I had doctor's notes. Because guess what? When you have doctor's notes and all these things, you know what your bosses do? A lot of them roll their eyes at that and they're like, well, you can just pay for it, which is true. You can just pay for a doctor's note. And they don't really care. And they're like, well, I know that you had a concussion and I know that you have a massive brain injury. And you were honest about both of these things before we hired you, but you're probably also just a drunk because you've been away from work for 3 weeks. And that vastly impacted my future work prospects. And it still does to this day because I can't use a workplace that I was at for almost a year as a reference. And that's terrible.
so-
And to think like I'm a one-off, right? I'm giving you an anecdote, but the idea that this doesn't happen in less severe ways would be insane to claim.
Okay, but again, so there, it does sound like you said a shit workplace with a shit manager, right? Because what should happen in this case, right, is he reaches out, says, hey, here's what's going on, or here, hey, what's going on? And you say, hey, I've got this issue, and he either accommodates you or he fires you, the one or the other, right?
Right.
And for the other people in the workplace who I'm assuming didn't know that you had this issue, maybe they did, right? But if they didn't know you had this issue, from their perspective, you are just being a bad worker. And in a lot of workplaces, one person not, one cog not turning correctly puts strain on everybody else. So it's reasonable for them to be annoyed by this.
It was pretty
And it's
shitty
not their
'cause that means that I
responsibility.
lost all of my coworkers
not-
as friends to some
please.
extent.
But it's not their responsibility to reach out to you or to anybody else to say, hey, what's going on? Right? If you're having an issue, it's your responsibility to inform the employer, to inform the other employees about this issue you're having. Right. And if you tell them, and they don't give a fuck and they're totally unreasonable, that this sounds like you had a shit workplace with a shit culture.
The problem
Yeah,
is that
and
this
if-
happens all the time in workplaces, particularly in large corporations, right? Talk about Walmart, talk about all these things. Even if you have a genuine medical condition, there are only so many doctor's notes that you get to have before they basically think you're a shitty person. And being claimed as a drunk or something else is not a crazy claim, and it proves the moralizing that happened. I was sick with IBS, and then I have a brain injury and had a concussion, and they assumed that I was a drunk. And the idea that this doesn't happen elsewhere, when I am like, you want to talk about work ethic, I have very good work ethic, right? I work very hard and I'm regularly complimented on it, but I got sick. And this is the issue, is that like this whole thing is enforced by our moralization of work ethic. All of the shit that I came across, me dealing with future employers, the whole reason why it's still a problem today for me is because of moralization of work ethic.
This is very much an is-ought thing, right? Like Doobie and Pan to a limited extent. You're both saying, well, they should do this. People should do this. People should behave in this way. People shouldn't leap to conclusions. People shouldn't make these judgments. People should do this. But what we're saying is that in very many cases, what actually plays out when the rubber hits the road is that they do these things that you are saying they shouldn't do. And they do it all the time. And that is directly, as Erudite has so succinctly said, tied to the moralization of work ethic in our culture today. This is why that what should happen doesn't happen. And instead, what is happening is people are seen as less than and treated as less than for morally, on a moral level, when simply they are a bad worker for whatever reason. It really doesn't matter.
So I think the problem here is that we're looking at one side of the equation. We're looking at what happened to Erudite, where through no fault of her own, she had a disease and she's shit talked for all of this stuff. We're not looking at the fact that there are a lot of people out there who unfortunately are bad workers and unfortunately do fake doctor's notes and stuff like that. Now, Erudite, I'm not going to say Erudite's the exception. There may be many people like her that this happens to, but I do think that it becomes a little bit more understandable if you think about all of the people on the other side of the equation as well. Now, I would agree, people in society, if your statement is, our society comes to conclusions too fast, just one bad thing heard about you from a past employer shouldn't be enough to disqualify you. I completely agree with you on that. But if you're telling me that you can't take that information into account at all when making your decision, that's what I disagree with. Not the fact that, because I agree that these companies can make mistakes and that it's shitty what happened to Erudite and stuff, right? I'm not defending that at all. I'm saying, however, that you can't prevent people from using the information that they have, entirely. You just should limit the scope of the information.
I think
No,
we
but
could
there are
definitely
times where
influence the culture here. Like, I think we could definitely influence the culture here, because it's not just about the employer, right? I think you guys are looking at it from the employer's perspective. This is about other coworkers as well, and how they will treat you and how they will react to you and things like that. And they absolutely will treat you like shit. And they'll make up rumors about you. I've seen it happen, right? Like, you have a medical condition, you're taking meds. I've heard it claimed that, like, I was working in a movie theater, and one of the people there had a condition that they had to take meds for. There was a rumor that was spread around that it was just opioids or it was some drugs, or I forget exactly what they were saying, but they were basically saying they were getting high at work all the time. It caused a lot of problems for them, right? Because this rumor got spread around because people jumped to these conclusions, right? So I do think we could definitely influence culture so that doesn't happen as much. Could we ever get rid of it completely? No, I don't think so. But I think we could definitely disentangle morality from work ethic to a better degree than we do currently.
And I
But
think
I don't
this
think me or
conversation
Doobie
is
was
an example
defending
to the
that.
point. But no, but the way this is the thing is the way the conversation has gone is sort of to this point, because like you guys sort of loosely agree that in the examples we're talking about, we're really talking about is an example of like a shitty work environment, shitty employers, shitty people, right? But the ways in which those people are being shitty in the, like, for example, the example that Kyla gave, the ways in which they're being shitty are a result of the exact kind of conflationary thinking that we're talking about, because what they did is they used these heuristics to make judgments about, in this example, Kyla, that were not warranted. And the thing is like we can get into specifics like we have been. We could loop back if we wanted to, but like all the examples that you guys give for like, oh, well, what about this? What about this example in our society where we make judgments on people for this? What about this example where we make judgments on people based on this? All the examples are just examples of what we're talking about, where it's unfair to make determinations. I know that you could like this is why the black people is a great example. It's because even if black people are statistically slightly more likely to commit a crime, that the heuristic quality of then going, okay, so it's now worthwhile and like valuable, like in any real way, to say, oh well, black people are more violent. Like this is the kind of heuristical thinking that I'm talking about. It's a breach. It's disproportionate. It's
The
not
let's
reason
go to
that
Erudite.
heuristic doesn't work is for different.
Let's go to Erudite. Who's Kyla though? Who's Kyla?
I'm
I'm
Kyla.
sorry, not so
Oh,
erudite.
I
Not
had
so
no
erudite.
idea.
My bad.
Yeah.
My
Okay.
bad. I'm
No,
sorry.
you're good. I use my names pretty interchangeably. Nice to meet you, Prime. I'm Kyla.
Sorry.
Let's do an experiment. Okay, so for everyone who is listening right now, every chatter, if you have experienced a situation where you had a reason for having a bad work ethic due to something kind of uncontrollable, health, sickness, family, shit happens, right? And you were judged and treated poorly and treated as basically an immoral person as a result of that, type 1. If that's never happened to you, type 2. And I
This
would
is
like
a
streamers
shitty way to
now.
do this.
I
Yeah,
would just
no
like
one is
to
going
see.
to admit. No
Yeah,
one is
I know
going
you
to
guys aren't
admit.
going to like this.
Well, no, because
Look at,
it's
I've got
extreme-
twos. I have
extremely,
twos.
extremely biased. Right? Most Twitch chatters are degenerates. They're discussing people just generally, right? So it's a really bad crowd you're asking this question to. They're gonna make tons of excuses for themselves.
That is a valid point. too.
Also,
you
their
really
reputation is
convinced me.
attached
I'm
to
not
it.
gonna
Who's
lie.
going to
Yeah,
type
you really-
2? No, I was
definitely-
judged by my peers, but it was totally deserved
I've
because I'm a
got
shitty
so many
worker.
twos. Are you kidding me? There's
Okay, well,
plenty
that just
of
goes
twos.
to show that the Twitch chat is completely incompetent and shouldn't be used as a source.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
the
So
fact-
let's reason backwards that because they all agreed with us, therefore they must be wrong as a result. Right? That's a
No, I think you're just
Yes.
asking a bad crowd that doesn't like to be held responsible for their shitty work ethic.
I'm saying we
Well,
shouldn't
too
make
bad we're
conclusions based
literally on
off of a
Twitch right
Twitch
now,
chat
appealing
poll,
to
and I will
the
die on
audience.
that hill.
Wow.
Well,
Ah.
I,
I don't know.
think that-
I
what do you
have
think-
trouble
what do you
believing
think-
these
Twitch
most
chat,
of
what do you
these
guys
even
think
know
about
what
Doobie's
even know
heuristic
why
that
they're pressing buttons right now.
ontologically evil.
well,
Wick?
can we get a fuckwick in chat? That's all I want. please.
Okay.
Like
Oh,
revolt.
also, Professor Meat, the reason I want to say something because you kept bringing up the race and violence thing, and I feel like that's completely different. Because if you treat someone different because they have a 0.00002% chance of hurting you, rather than a 0.0001% chance of hurting you, well, those chances, for at least from the human mind, are basically zero. So the reason that maybe it is okay to treat black people
Okay.
like they have a 0.00002% chance of killing you, but that's not going to be any different from how you treat white people who have like a 0.00001
All right, so
whatever
I would
chance.
say So what I would say then is that it's fair, it's okay for an employer, for people to look at someone who's a bad worker and say, hey, being a bad worker is highly indicative of not producing and contributing as much to the workplace, right? It's okay to make that determination. What it's not okay to do is say this is the whole difference, is that it's not okay to equate that with the determination of, oh, this person is a bad worker, therefore we can make basically of any other conclusions about them with any significant degree of certainty. That same with the boyfriend example, and same with it's not the same because we got conflated on those terms. It's not the same in the cheating example if we keep cheating down to like a colloquial defined definition of like you're not getting beat by your boyfriend or something, you're trying to get out of it. But then to even use that example, if we conflate the definition of cheating to all these different categories where it might be acceptable, well, in that case, if we're going to go with that definition, that would again be an exact example of why you wouldn't necessarily judge someone for cheating if we're using that definition, right? Like all of these examples are consistent, but they're all an example of the problematic thinking that you're engaging in.
I think the disconnect here is that I think that you can use judgments or stereotypes for decisions as long as those decisions, in relation to how big of a decision it is, right? My argument isn't that, okay, someone did bad work, therefore they're a horrible person and shouldn't be trusted at anything. However, I think it's fair, as you admitted, to say, okay, this person did a bad job working at this job. They did a lot of bad stuff. So I'm probably going to hire the person who doesn't have the record. Now, I think that that's a completely reasonable decision to have rather than this person should be completely blacklisted and so on forever. I think that that's the main disconnect here. I'm not saying that just because you have them doing this bad thing once is justification to do anything you want to them. I'm saying be appropriate in your response.
Yeah, so and that isn't my position, just to be clear, because that isn't what I'm saying. But I guess let me just ask you a question. Like in Kyla's example, or sorry, Not So Erudite's example, I need to get better about that. In Not So Erudite's example, right, that she gave, I'm assuming we're all like believing her story, right?
No, she's a filthy liar.
Yeah, and even then we can accept to sure, but even then,
even given
her lying ways, right? Exactly.
I heard she was late.
With your guys' premises, you could try to argue that I'm a liar and a bad person because I had bad work ethic twice.
Here's the thing: Kyla showed up to the Prime panel on time. Therefore, I can't possibly believe the supposition that she's a bad worker because she showed up to the Prime panel on time.
Oh, I say plus or minus 10 minutes around work. Don't give a fuck. You can't try to justify that I don't have sometimes a bad work ethic. I work hard and efficient when I'm there, but I'm not on time almost ever.
Well, I've never seen Kyla late to anything ever in my entire life.
You'll just have to disregard my claim.
My panels aren't work, right? They're a form of fun. There's a little bit of paradise for Erudite, so she's always on time. Go ahead, Meet.
So yeah, since we can trust her,
I get to flirt with Prime when I come on, so it's pretty based.
So since we can trust her ontologically in this case for all the reasons that we described, let's trust her story and assume the nature of the story. Like, here's the whole thing. Like, I just want to ask this question: Do you think that, assuming her story is true, that could reasonably be described as an example of the problems of conflating value judgments about a person with their work ethic?
Yeah, I think it could be an example of a problem of people coming to conclusions that are too absolute and not being willing to change their decision. Absolutely.
Okay, but
I think people do this all the time, and it's a big problem.
But so people do it all the time, and it's a big problem. So you agree with me there? You basically just agree with me. That's literally what we're saying. But
I mean, that's always been my position.
But that position, maybe you just don't realize. But like when you say things like when you equate the way that we talk about certain moral judgments and say, yeah, it's okay to make some determinations like that to some degree based upon like the heuristics of work ethic. I'm just letting you know, like, that does not sound in any way the same. Like, those words, when you arrange them in that way, doesn't mean the same thing as saying we need to separate these two things.
Sure.
Like,
let me explain it. So if I was Kyla's boss, okay, now I would think I might be a little suspicious, right? Like, unfortunately, I might not exactly believe her claim. However, the amount of certainty that I should have that she's lying is low enough to the point where I have no justification at all saying that she's a bad worker to other people and blacklisting her at all, right? Now, I think it's completely fine. Look, you can't expect them. Obviously, they're going to have a bad impression, and unfortunately, that's going to be the case. However, you can expect them to not make absolute conclusions given their limited amount of information. That's what I'm saying the difference is.
But there's a little bit of a spooky territory you're getting here. Here's the problem, though, right? Because, like, to a certain extent, you're sort of right, but when you're starting to form hypothesis, but you're defining a hypothesis, well, there's a certain degree of confidence that I can gauge in about the person. That's at that point, there's no difference between forming a hypothesis and just having a conclusion that's rooted in a lower degree of certainty. It can still be unfair.
If I was Kyla's employer and I said, okay, well, there's a 30% chance that she's a bad worker. However, I don't have all the information, and that's not enough of a certainty to ruin someone's life. However, if I was Kyla's employer and let's say she did it and I was 99% sure, yeah, that probably is a reason to tell other companies not to hire her. So yes, I do think we should react differently when we have different percentages of certainty. I think that's obvious.
Right. So we should separate that then from the idea of ascribing some kind of or inferring any kind of moral weight off of a person based off that. Because that's the thing. In your description that you just gave, there's nowhere in that chain of events that you just described any kind of inference of like a moral value to that person. There's no moral inferences about that individual being made in that description of events that you just gave. Right, so you're just explaining
if I
the
said
kind of
30%
that
she's a bad worker, that's a moral judgment, right? Like I'm like,
no,
her,
it's
hey,
not.
She might
It's
be
not.
a
You're
bad worker.
loading
It's
the
just
question.
not.
No, it's not though. It's not a moral judgment, because I would say moral judgments about a person are things like they're totally separate. We've
Drunk,
had this whole conversation.
dishonest.
I think she might be a bad worker.
Lying.
That is so different. Come on. I don't know, Pan. Talk to people. I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know what to tell you. I think that's completely
you,
reasonable.
If I'm telling you that my whole point, if like you just described, you just agreed that in Kyle's, in Not So Erudite's example, what you just agreed that it was an example of bad attribution of moral weight, the kind of things that I'm differentiating moral from like virtuous or whatever.
I don't think it was necessarily wrong for the boss to have had that impression of her, unfortunately, because people make wrong impressions all the time. I think the boss had nowhere near enough information to condemn her in actions and stuff.
I'm making a difference. I'm drawing a difference between my whole point is that I'm making a difference between moral claims and virtue claims, right? But the whole thing is that you can't use in your argument to show me an example of why it's necessary to like to infer these things from one another. You cannot use in your example an example where you have made the separation that I just described. In your example, my separation between moral judgments and ethical and virtue judgments, you've literally just described that separation. Nowhere in your example are you making a moral weight. And when I tell you that there's no moral judgment in your example, you can then not refute that claim by saying, oh, well, I said work ethic, which is a moral claim. That's complete circular reasoning.
I'm sorry.
Where's the moral
saying
claim?
I think someone is a drunk, or I think someone is lying about going to the doctors. I think someone is lying about a medical condition. I don't see how that's not a moral, I don't see how that's not me assuming something moral.
Each of those sentences that you just said are different from the sentence, they are a bad worker.
I think we have to outline that.
But where's the moral judgment, right? Where's the moral judgment being made based on, I almost called you Kyla, Erudite's good or bad work ethic, right? Due to her illness or whatever. In telling other people that, hey, she was showing up at work drunk and she wasn't doing her work and yada, yada. It doesn't seem like they're making a moral judgment by saying those things either, if it's what they think they experienced.
It's absolutely moral, because when they
How?
say drunk, they don't say like, oh no. I mean, one of them was at an addiction service. So when they're saying drunk, they're not being like, hey, we're really worried about you, right? If it was drunk specifically and they weren't connecting it to some level, moral level, they wouldn't have said drunk like it's some dirty word. They would have been like, hey, you should probably take some time off and go to rehab. And they'd be cutting me for totally different reasons. And they'd be tiptoeing it, because in an addiction center especially, you'd hope that if they genuinely thought I was a drunk, that they wouldn't be like morally judging me and basically pressuring me to quit, and then telling future employers and other people in my workspace that I was a drunk, right? And meaning it as a dirty way. By the way, I also lost my research program with them as well as a result of this, because they just happened to tell my supervisor, who had nothing to do with any of this. And guess what my supervisor said to me? I am disgusted with you. So don't tell me that it wasn't moral weighted. It was absolutely morally weighted.
Do you think that there's something immoral about showing up drunk to an addiction center if you work there?
Do I think that there's something immoral? Yeah. It doesn't matter what I think. It's the implication that they put on me.
Well, hold on.
Why they treated me.
I understand what they think. I understand what they think, but I'm asking you: do you think that if you were actually showing up to an addiction center where you work drunk, do you think it'd be reasonable to say that that's like an immoral action?
I would say.
Problem is that their jump to saying that I was a drunk specifically was because I was missing work. That's it.
Exactly.
So if I was showing up to work drunk, the moralizing, because we might say the moralizing might be justified there. If I was showing up to work drunk, if I had alcohol on my breath regularly, if the clients commented about the alcohol on my breath, all these things would justify some level of moralization.
Hold on. But how do they get to drunk from you're not showing up to work?
That's a great question. It probably has something to do with the fact that we conflate work ethic with morality.
No, that's silly. No,
it absolutely is.
I don't think you make the drunk. I don't think you make the drunk. No, I don't think
Yes.
you make the jump to drunk from not showing up to work, just like inherently, right? So there had to be some other interaction you had with them. Maybe you're taking your medication and spoken to somebody on the phone, and you're slurring a bit. Maybe something
Dude,
like
it
that.
sounds like you're
They'll
just
lead them to
you're just
think.
really
They'll lead
naively
them to
reading
think.
people's
Please stop.
stuff.
That would lead them to think that you were actually drunk while you were off the clock, right?
Actually, specifically in this case, the investigation that was done, I can't go into all of the details about it, but it sounds like there was a specific person that had a bone to pick with an entire team on my field, and they made an accusation to a higher up who had literally never ever met me, and then it got trickled down, and the only evidence that that higher up had who bought into it was that I missed work, and they said, well, she's a bad worker, so it's pretty reasonable to also assume that she's a drunk.
Wait.
Wait, hold on. But somebody, wait, please. But
Doobie,
somebody
doobie.
accused you of being a drunk, right? And then you're saying that somebody else believed that, and because they believe that you were drunk, right, and you weren't showing up to work because you were drunk, there was some like moral condemnation that they threw on you. But you agree with that moral condemnation, right? So you agree that if you had been drunk, right, and not showing up to work, right, there is, or maybe showing up at work and you were drunk, there would be some moral condemnation there. So you actually
Not
agree with the moral claim, right?
So
What you
specifically
disagree with
what
is
they
the fact that
said-
they made it about you.
Yeah, so the reason why they said it was justified to believe that based on my track record of working that I was a drunk, because I was a young, white, attractive woman who probably stayed out too late partying. That was the assumption that they made. That was the jump they made.
They
well, it
said
makes
those
sense.
words to you.
Yes, they said,
Then it
well,
sounds
she's
like you
young
got a
and
fucked
white.
up workplace.
Yeah, but the problem is that people experience this to lesser degrees all the time. I will agree that my case is extreme. I'm totally willing to bite that. The issue is that this happens to smaller extents all the time, particularly for people with invisible disease, chronic illness, ADHD, and autism. All the time. It's actually a really big issue specifically for neurodivergent people because of the moral weighting that we attach. This moral virtue that we
Hold on,
have.
but there's a
we
difference
connect
there.
to work ethics. It's a
Wait, hold
problem.
on. So-
remember, it
Wait,
was a
please.
big
But if
comparison.
somebody has any of those things, if you've made the employer aware that you have these issues, right, at like up front, at the interview desk, I think it's if the employer or other employees who know that you have these issues make moral judgments about you based on your work ethic after knowing that you have these other problems going on, that's a fuck up on their end, right? But what's more likely is that you don't tell them these things, because most people don't tell them. So they're just being forgetful at work, not getting things done, and everybody else is having to pick up the slack. And I think it's reasonable for other people who don't know that this other issue exists, and it's not their responsibility to investigate, unless they're the manager or whatever, then it is. But if they're just another employee, it's not your responsibility to investigate why your coworker isn't doing their job correctly.
I
Right,
really
so-
want to push back against
Oh,
this. I
God.
really want to push back against this. There's
Go for
a
it.
reason that a lot of people don't inform their workplace about these things is because a lot of the times they're not believed, and a lot of times they're moralized like, oh, they're just using it as an excuse to get out of work. And this happens all the time across. And look, there's two ways to get ahead in office politics and inner office politics. It's either by working harder than the others around you, or by denigrating and making sure that those people look less than. And that is something that happens all the time, is people will use like little things and moralize them, start rumors. It happens all the time. This is part of office politics in general. And when we talk about like, well, you should inform people in a perfect world, yes, but because again of the societal entanglement of morality and work ethic that we have, it is one of the major reasons that people don't inform their employers, is because they will be looked as less than if they are seen or in the military, you were accused of being a malingerer is the word they used. If you would report
Who
sick
the fuck
often,
uses the word malingerer?
military, it's a legal term, right? It's a part of the legal code. Is if you were seen
Diagnosis,
faking
too.
illness, it was considered illegal as against the UCMJ, right?
It's a medical diagnosis as well. You can diagnose people as being a malingerer. There's a
Oh,
test. in
somebody.
psychology that
I
you
just
can
looked this
verify.
up. I assume there was a lazy. Somebody who pretends to be sick is what you're saying.
Yes, but the thing is because a lot of illnesses, like Erudite was saying, are invisible in a lot of ways. You can't really tell by looking at someone if they're sick a lot
Yeah,
of
so
times.
it's your job to inform your employer.
So I'd also just
But
like to
again,
point
I'll
out
tell you the reasons that
I
they
disagree
don't.
with Doobie.
Oh,
You
who
should
gives a
never-
fuck?
You should never tell your employer
'Cause I won't
any
hire
bad
you.
things about you. Exactly. Why would you ever do that?
Yeah, why would I want to hire a mentally ill person? Like what?
Right, but that's why you shouldn't divulge that.
Okay, yeah, and okay,
Because we
they're
connect
different
moral
incentives, right? So
value
my
and
incentive,
human value to
no, not
GDP,
true.
which is terrible.
No, not true. It has nothing to do with a
Yes,
moral value. It's absolutely nothing
Well,
to do
then
with
you
it.
agree with
It's
us if it
it's
doesn't.
the hold on. It's the fact that if I hire somebody who has a ton of mental illnesses, right? They might be a great person, right? But given that they have these issues, it's more likely that their issues are going to cause me issues in the workplace. And because it's going to cause me issues, cause the other employees issues, it's going to cause the clients issues. And I just don't want to hire somebody like that. It's nothing to do with them being a good person. I'm sure they're a wonderful person, but they have a mental illness and makes it difficult to hire them, right? So I'm just not going to hire them.
What about okay? What about then a person? Because I've applied to a bunch of jobs, and they asked me like, can you lift at least 50 pounds? Is it okay? Like, should is it okay for an employer to not want to hire a person like that who like can't lift 50 pounds? Like
The job
relating that
involves
to
lifting,
this.
yeah.
Yeah, but like if your job involves just being like socially to be able to be social to many people, right? Just be able to interact well, then and if you have a certain mental illnesses that make that difficult, when we also say that you can't hire them.
No, so no one's arguing that like people aren't to some extent in our current society going to be like left out of the meritocracy, right? No one's arguing otherwise that we should tear down the meritocracy result. But what we're saying, I feel like the drunk example can be used as a great example to actually sort of prove the point that I'm trying to get at, because even in that example, I think it's pretty ironic because showing up to work drunk at an addiction center, I mean, I would need more context, but I could totally see a context in which someone is treated in that situation. It's the people there. You could ask the people there, but I could see how people in an addiction center, if one of their coworkers is showing up to work drunk, that they could look at that example and say, hey, we should separate the determination that there might be a problem here from the idea that like there's something necessarily wrong with them. Having empathy for someone with an addiction, like in a theoretical potential example, is like literally the basis of an addiction center, right? And the whole basis of an addiction center is separating these practical judgments that we make about what someone is capable of versus like how we think about them as people.
So something Pan had said previously, and I want to get that before we head out, right? Pan was talking about people in his own work environment who may not be cutting it. Is it okay for them to be resentful for a person who, for whatever reason, is not putting in what is perceived to be as their fair share?
What does resentful get you? Like, you're drinking poison and hoping someone else dies. You're not hurting the person just being resentful, right? Like, what does that
Okay.
get you?
No,
I mean, if
I
you
just
take
wanted to start
actions,
there.
you like.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, I think it depends on. I think there's obviously going to be instances where it's justified, like someone through no fault of their own is not doing their work. I think it's completely justified to be resentful, and even like if you're have a high degree of certainty that nothing like what happened to Kyla over there, and you have a degree of certainty, like you saw them out at the bars on their Snapchat stories, you caught them in or in 4K, caught them red-handed, then yeah, I think it's okay for you to take actions that are resentful, like show your employer, hey, look, this person literally came in drunk, like they were at a bar for 5 hours drinking their ass off and then came to the addiction clinic. I think it's okay for you to take actions if the people who are being irresponsible are affecting your workload. I think that's completely reasonable, but at the same time you should be very sure before taking any actions against someone else.
So, like, okay, is the problem, and like, so the problem, like the error I described, her coworkers being resentful for her inability to complete her task, right? Is the actual problem here not institutional support? So if Erudite was able to take time off, right? Because I mean, if she's that badly hurt, then like why is she at work? Like she can't complete it, right? If we had institutional support there, so that this person gets to either take time off of work, right? Or if it's okay if they decide to quit, and then they'll still be financially supported somehow. So like they'll just separate themselves from the situation, right? If that was the case, then there's no resentment. If we had a culture, right, a culture supported by institutional tools, that says, well, people who are having these troubles, right, and we've already listed a whole, like, a whole set of these troubles, right? But if you're having these types of troubles, and you can't work, that's okay. We'll support you some other way, right? If we had that, then could we still have this idea of a work ethic, right? Because then, our friend Erudite, she's still, as hard of a worker as she is, but in that situation, she was already gone, right? She was getting the help that she needs. She needs concentrating on recovering from the problems that she was having, rather than like trying to struggle through another work day and then being ineffective at it. Erudite.
So just to outline, I don't know what the States has, but as far as institutional support, at least Canada does have this. So we have workman's comp and sick leave benefits. And my understanding is they're a fair bit more generous or like easy to access than America. I could be wrong though. I haven't looked a ton into your guys' like unique stuff, but it's not too hard in Canada to, for example, like go on and get sick leave benefits. And that's broadly actually paid for by specifically the government. It's not even your employer who has to deal with this. So there's no cost to your employer other than they've lost a worker. But usually, if it's for sick leave benefits, you have to prove it to the government. You have to be pretty stringent in how you prove it to the government with doctor's notes and stuff like that. There's no loss to the employer other than basically they have to find somebody new. The reality is that the work will still treat you like shit when you get back, make moral condemnation, and it goes back to this original point, which is that we have this issue in our society where we have entangled work ethic with Protestant work ethic, because that's where it comes from, and there is inherently tied a moral piece to it, and I'm arguing that it shouldn't be there.
So, but Erudite, then why didn't you take advantage of those tools then? Okay, so you did.
But I had income and it didn't cost my work anything. And I gave them a heads up, like when the concussion happened and everything, gave them a heads up, doctor's note. When the doctor said, hold up, you need to go back in. I did all of that, but it doesn't cost my workplace anything either way, right? Mm-hmm. And all they have to do is basically take the doctor's note and fill the place, which in my workplace specifically, we have a ton of casuals. Issue is that when I went back, I still got treated like shit. I still got treated like basically like 3 weeks off to like laze around and hang out, and I did get treated like shit when I came back.
What about your IBS? You're saying that you had IBS and then you like were and maybe this is a separate job, so I'm getting the timeline confused. But
yeah, these are two separate jobs now.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you had IBS. And that's the one I was focusing on, right? So you had IBS and you couldn't physically do the job. You couldn't crouch, right? On some days, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. So then why were you still there if you were suffering that badly?
Basically because if you switch and you do go on to like paid leave, like I was friends with a lot of these people. I went to high school with most of my coworkers too. And I was embarrassed because I knew that if they thought that I was a bad worker, that I would be, especially because I'm not just in like normal work ethic world. I was in like Dutch CRC world as well, where like Protestant work ethic is like maximal. And I was like, absolutely, I was afraid to leave work, and I kept just trying to push through it and being like, I'm sure I could do it this time. I'm sure my body can handle it. And I'm going into work, my hair was falling out. Like I was pushing myself because of the fear of the moral condemnation from my social milieu about being a bad worker.
Okay. But in doing so, you probably put some strain on everybody else because you were trying to force yourself through this thing that you probably should have, taken some time off work. It sounds like, right? And because you didn't, maybe they looked down on you not because of the bad work ethic, but because you, rather than taking the time off, was it you decided to go into work and put extra strain on them because you were showing up?
So time off wouldn't fix the IBS, right? The big issue in this is that I just kept being sick and I didn't know why. Part of the issue is that through this process, I wasn't diagnosed with IBS until like months after this whole situation, right? So I kept going in because I thought, all these different things. Yeah. If I took time off, by the way, they still would have had to pick up the slack in this specific job because they didn't have casuals.
Yeah, but I feel like But I feel like people are much more forgiving if they know that you're taking time off because you're genuinely like injured or sick, right? Rather than like you're taking time off because I guess they not think you're drunk or something.
I was going
Well, they
into
think you're
work because when I
manipulating the
took
I think
time off, I absolutely got treated like more like shit. At least when I was in work, yeah, I wasn't as efficient, but I'm a pretty fast worker, and at least they had a worker, right? And in their view, they're like, well, at least you're working, right? And you might think, but if all they care about is work, but the reality is like, this isn't how it played out. When I missed work, I got treated much more poorly than when I at least came in and was terrible at the job.
Really?
Yeah, I feel weird
Yeah,
about digging
but
into your like
yeah.
situation, but I feel like because again, it
Yeah,
just
it could
seems
be it could be
Go
the
ahead.
case in many circumstances, for example, right? That like this is just an example of another point in the argument of like the judgment of what is an easy determination for people to jump to, right? When they're desperate to make conclusions, is not necessarily the right determination for what actually contributes to being a good worker, right? So, for example, it could be I've been in work environments where I was incredibly forgetful. I had a lot of really obvious weaknesses. I was like bad at coordinating. I was bad at coordinating with certain individuals. I was bad at coordinating in certain environments. When in certain environments where the pressure was on, I wasn't as productive, right? But that doesn't mean that I wasn't like excelling past my other coworkers in other areas, right? But sometimes some things are more obvious than others, and it's totally possible for like an employer, just for an example, to like draw easy conclusions or bad conclusions because they're easy, right? And this is just this is. That doesn't seem like that complicated that doesn't seem like it's that complicated or uncommon of an idea for employers to do, right? Do we think that bosses are like great by and large? All like whatever. I don't know about our experiences with our bosses, but I haven't necessarily had like a totally great experience with all of my employers being like really, really great at identifying who's actually contributing the most value to the workplace, right? They just oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes employers cling to they try to find people to blame. They cling to anything they can grab onto to like blame the workers, to point towards faults, to find a reason to potentially fire someone, or not even fire someone, just put the blame on someone else to try to find a direction, right? Anyone who's worked in the, and I'm sure that a lot of Twitch streamers would sympathize, but anyone who's worked in the restaurant industry, oh my God, that's the best example ever. No one in the restaurant industry knows how to manage anything or determine who is a good worker.
Let's think pre-COVID. I'm going to distinguish pre-COVID because I'm going to talk about having a flu. Probably most of you have been in a workplace pre-COVID. Remember back in the dark ages, when somebody came in with a flu and everyone said, man, you're such a hard worker. You're feeling sick, you're feeling shitty, but you're coming in anyways.
You got
Even
praised.
though all that's going to happen is this motherfucker's going to get everyone sick. And then a whole bunch of other workers are going to have to take time off because we have such a moral laden level of just coming into work and working hard that we like do it above all else because it is so moralized over. Like it's insane.
It actually hurt productivity. In a lot of cases, it hurts productivity overall. Like the employer would be better served if you had flu or had a sickness or illness and you stayed home. In a lot of cases, not every cases, jobs are different, right? But what happens is, again, because of the culture surrounding it, they will want you to come in because it looks better. It looks like you're a harder worker. It's performative in nature, right? It's very performative nature, and we are a performative species. And this happens all the time. Again, this assumption that employers and other coworkers are always going to make the best and correct and rational decisions just doesn't bear out in practice at all. And I think that it's irrational to assume that it will. It's not been my experience. It sounds like it hasn't been Erudite's experience. It sounds like it hasn't been Meat's experience. There are plenty of people, I think, that can attest to this, that it just doesn't work out in practice.
I think that's a really good example of times when this could, I guess, definitely be consequential. People value people going into work so much that even though it hurts overall productivity, it's bad. I will say, I just wanted to add, though, that I have seen a few companies, the company that I just got done working with, where they basically made it very important for you to take sick days off if you had a disease or something. Not COVID. Obviously, you were banned from like basically the workplace if you had COVID. But regardless, they took a very firm stance. Like they would be mad at you if they saw you come to work and you were sick and stuff. So I have seen some companies take a hard line to that and kind of realize that, hey, this is a problem. We don't want a sick person to come in and just like get everybody else in our workplace sick. So I have seen some companies start to get around that, but overall, I think that's a really good example.
Yeah, in my experience, the sick person coming in would get shit from all the other employees and would probably be praised by the boss. Right? Because all the because again, most of my work, maybe this is coloring my view of all this, right? Is sales work, right? So the way that you send it over the phone is extremely important. Somebody came into the office, right, to make a sale or something. You don't want your coworker sneezing on the other side of your fucking cubicle, right? Because it's just a bad environment to be in. So the other employees would give you shit. You'd go in anyway because you needed the hours, you needed to make the sales, right? The owner is going to be happy because if you're not there, he's got an empty desk, not being productive, right? But yeah, it wasn't like a universally like praise. Oh God, you're some kind of a hero, right? Typically that came from the employer just being thankful that you're showing up anyway and making this desk productive.
Okay, so we've gone over our time. Thank you all so much for this. This has been great. We will continue on. So the content doesn't end here. We have open walk on panel. Audience members like you just sitting at home may participate. So stick around. We do have more content for you. I'm going to give these people an outro, these amazing individuals outro. Before I do that, though, guys, if you've been enjoying this content, if you walked in and you're just like, oh, this is a lot of fun, hit that follow button, then hit that follow button, make sure notifications are on so you know I'm going live. I do 7 days a week, either here or on YouTube. I got social media. Check us out on Twitter, where I tweet things out and you know what's going on. Discord, we do everything in Discord, including open walk on panel, which will be happening soon. So be a part of our Discord, be a part of our community. We'd love to have you jump on in. YouTube is where you find the VODs. If you missed anything here, right? And I think this is a pretty good panel. Then check out YouTube and check out that VOD. Like, comment, subscribe, consider becoming a YouTube member, supporting us that way by hitting the join button. Okay, I'll give an outro to all these wonderful people, but remember, still more content afterwards, so no need to leave. We'll start with Wickler.
Look, I didn't name myself. I don't give myself these monikers such as Big Dick Wick or Wickler, as Erudite has called me tonight. This just happens, and I adjust to the times. I deal with reality how it is rather than how I wish it would be. That's all I'm saying.
When did I ever call you that?
You earlier on, you meant to say Hitler, but you started to say Wick instead.
Yeah.
Oh shoot! I'm sorry. That's my brain injury.
It happened, and now
That's not great.
now it's a thing. So here we are.
Apologize.
But anyway, thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this topic. It's something that's a problem that is kind of insidious because a lot of people don't view it as a problem, right? A lot of people view it as a good thing, as a moral thing, as a thing that we should perpetuate. But it's causing a lot of issues, especially in the modern day workplace. If you like my takes or you hate my takes, you can find
you like
me
guys with big dicks.
Yeah, or that's true, or magnificent beards, all sorts of things.
Metaphorical and literal.
You can find me at twitch.tv/deathofcertainty, where we always remember that no matter how right we think we are, there's a good possibility we may be wrong. So the best decision in a lot of cases is no decision at all, is to withhold judgment, is to withhold making any kind of decisions until you find out more information, which is pretty on topic for the discussion tonight. If I had only 5% certainty of a thing, I wouldn't make a decision, right? Either way, I would wait until I was more certain. That's it. Thanks for having me, Prime. Love to be here. And yeah, that's me, gang.
Yeah. So we can have perceptions of having a big dick, but like we need someone to check ourselves in reality, make sure we're right.
I'd send you a file, but it said the file size was too large, so it wouldn't go through. I don't know.
It's so good. Thank you, Wick. You're honestly a treasure. All right. Next, another treasure, right? His name is Pan. We'll go to Pan. Pan, seriously, glad to have you back. All right, like you proved today why I was such a big fan of you, and why I just like how I hit up Wick, I would hit up Pan all the time with invites, right? Begging Pan, please Come on, right? Like, we need you to lower the IQ of my audience for libertarian takes. Yeah, thank you so much for coming back and being a part of this community. Seriously, you're very much welcome here. Thanks for being back.
No problem. I'm happy to lower the IQ of your audience. I like being done what seems impossible. No one thought your audience could get any lower in IQ, yet I make it happen somehow. I'm glad to contribute to that. Thank you, everyone. I had fun talking tonight. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitch .tv/PolitePan now. I am reformed. I'll try to do some more debates and stuff coming up, and some more propaganda streams. I'm actually working on some propaganda documents right now based on papers I read while at my internship. So stay tuned, I guess. But yeah, thanks everyone.
You were talking about like how you should actively be a parasite to society. No, I think you still are problematic. I think you still.
I like to use my name as a misnomer. When I was problematic Pan, I was overly polite. I'm hoping when I'm polite Pan, I'll be overly problematic.
Okay. All right. Good start. Thanks so much. Next, we'll go to Professor Meat. Thank you for jumping in. Professor Meat's another good person who is so great at participating. Like, that has a lot to say, and that's a really good thing. As a panelist, that's like aces. So thank you, Professor Meat, for coming in and having really interesting things to say. Because some people want to say a lot of stuff, but don't have anything interesting to say. But you usually do. So thanks for being around.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Very kind words. I would like to think I come so close to having too much to say, but ride that line perfectly. Professor_Meat on Twitch, Sword and Shield of the Base and the Righteous. Loved being here. Thanks for having me. Always enjoy contending our ideas against each other, especially when I'm extra right. So thanks, y'all. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Next, we go to our Dark Lord and Savior. His name is Doobie. All right, Doobie, thanks for coming through and taking the role of the bourgeoisie, right? The capitalists, and judging all us lowly workers for what we are, lazy scum. I'm pretty sure that's all I got from your talk. Doobie, thanks so much for being around.
Thank you. And yeah, just be clear. Most people who say they're grinding aren't grinding. They're actually lazy pieces of shit who should either get better jobs or just stop bitching. So I'm Doobie. I help run the politics server on Discord. That is discord.gg/politics. I always get complaints from the mod team because I'd never advertise our AMAs and shit. So I guess I'll do that. We have vice presidential candidate from Libertarian Party of 2020, Spike Cohen. I said those words at the same time for some reason. Spike Cohen on May 13th, Friday at 3 p.m. We'll be having him on for an AMA. You can yell at him for being a stupid libertarian. It'll be a good time. We're having Stephen Michael Davis on the 14th. Fucking Roger Stone. If everything works out, we'll have a Roger Stone on the 30th at 6 p.m. EST. And yeah, pretty good time.
Nice. Doobie is always blowing it up there in his podcast stuff. He was right. He doesn't advertise enough about all the stuff they're doing. It's the biggest political Discord server on Discord. I suppose it's the only place you'll find that. But yeah, it's a biggest server there. So check out Politics Discord. They have these great AMAs with a large variety of people, the bigger names you think would come on Discord to talk about these things. They managed to pull it off. So check out Politics Discord server. Thank you so much, Dewey, for being such a great guest and a part of my community. All right. Last but the greatest, certainly, right? We have Erudite. Erudite. Thanks for coming through. I want a future with more Erudite. When I come up with topics, I'm wondering would Erudite be good for this? Right? It happens all the time. I hope to have something that can attract Erudite over to this channel. I would have her everywhere. I'd have her on all black everything. I suggested blackface to her. She got really mad about that. I don't know why. But
I got offended on your behalf, like a good white savior does.
Thank you. But I think very highly of Erudite, even though we oftentimes disagree. So thanks so much for spending time with my community.
Like I said, Prime, I'm just attracted to your panel because I get to flirt with you when I come on. So, who can deny that cute smile, right?
women, right? We are so privileged that we just get to hit on men publicly on stream. Okay.
white
My name
ones.
is yeah,
white women,
it's
yeah,
really.
just the white.
I don't know if I can hit on Doobie yet. I'm gonna come up with some good frog lines and then it'll be. Anyways, my name is Not So
Okay, I'm
Erudite.
used to it.
It's not
my
that
name
hard.
is-
Just say you can't wait to turn him into a prince or something.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll croak them out eventually.
Gotta be better.
Yeah, when his lips flare out like that, it's a frog mating ritual thing. So
True.
it's working. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Not So Erudite. You can find me everywhere: Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. Don't expect the same level of nuance on Twitter that you get anywhere else. I'm also on TikTok. I'm going to be transitioning to more full-time doing this in after like May 12th because my present job ends that day. So yeah, you can probably look forward to see even more.
I will. Like Erudite. I need you to get like a life jacket because you're gonna be right under a tidal wave of invites, right? You know, and you are available. No, a tidal wave of invites because we love having Erudite on, and I love especially when we disagree with each other because then it's a lot of fun. Fireworks, you know, and any play relationship, you know, you gotta have those disagreements. You gotta have
That
that.
tension.
Yeah. Thanks so much to all of you. All of you are fantastic, right? I should put more pan. Oh, Doobie, you're gonna say something?
So just really quickly, I don't want people to get the wrong impression. So we disagreed a lot in this panel, but I'm not joking. I genuinely believe that Erudite, Meat, Pan, and Wick are some of the most intelligent, best people on the platform, and you guys should follow all of them.
Aw,
Absolutely.
I was
And subscribe. Give
expecting
them all
a
your money.
funny dig. Thanks.
Oh,
No,
dude.
actually, yeah, I think you guys are really intelligent. Just wrong about everything I disagree with you on.
Same, you know, ditto.
Alright.
We love you too, Doobie.
Okay. Yes. All right. Well, I love all this. It was a great group that happened to say yes to all this. I'm very thankful for how this turned out. All right. Off to more content. That's Open Walk On panel. That's happening right after this. Anyone here can join us on that Open Walk On panel. But if not, that's okay. Thanks for spending your time, your energy, your knowledge, your passion with my community. I know they appreciate it just as much as I do. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.